Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod. This is officially the Christmas episode, I guess, because the episode will be coming out right before Christmas, although, there's no real Christmas theme. We do have a lot to talk about, though. We have so much to talk about. In fact, this may be one of the most jam-packed episodes of the Access Blockbusters Pod. Obviously, there's a little trailer that came out this past week that we, of course, have to talk about. I also saw a movie that I think is an interesting one to discuss. We'll be talking about that. A lot of news about Avengers Doomsday. A lot of news about just random things in the MCU. And obviously, we still have to review the episodes for the three shows, Creature Commando, Skeleton Crew, and Dune Prophecy. So much to talk about, guys. But first, before we get into any of that, and I'll go through my usual housekeeping, but there will be a little bit of an additional bit of housekeeping here that I want to explain. As always, there are always chapter times in the description, so if you just don't care, I just want to put this here for people who are interested in knowing what's going on in the world of Access Blockbusters Pod and understanding, especially as it pertains to next week's episode, because it will be a little bit different than the normal ones. But again, time code's in the description. As always, you can skip the intro if you feel like. But before we get into any of that, subscribe to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel if you are enjoying this content. Let me know in the comments what you think about any of the topics. And if you are interested, we also have an audio-only format on Spotify. And if you prefer that, want to run and listen to the podcast or just heading out doing groceries, I don't know, make sure to just follow it on Spotify and leave a rating and let me know in the comments what you think, in the comments of the YouTube video and Instagram on, via email about what you think about the podcast as well. So guys, before we get into any of these topics here, wanted to do a little housekeeping, like I said, on next week's episode. So for those of you who don't know, I posted a segment a while ago about how I run this podcast, and essentially TLDR is that I, try to compile all the stories, all the clips, record segments at different times if it's more convenient, and then compile it all together into what becomes an episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod. I usually then start to upload it at the end of the week, Friday, Saturday-ish, and then have it out Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, with maybe some of the clips from that episode coming out beforehand if they're more relevant. For example, Dune Prophecy reviews need to come out on Saturday before the episode even comes out because the next episode comes out on Sunday. So just want to, give it as a primer for the next episode. However, it is the holiday season, and I will be traveling for a little bit. So I still wanted to maintain the rigorous schedule that I've had, which has been so much fun just to have new videos coming out, comments every single day, discussing different things with different people every single day. It's been awesome. And so we are not slowing down at all, even though I will be personally away for a little bit. But yes, so I will be traveling, and that means that this episode that's coming out now during the Christmas season is reflective of stuff that happened the week before. And so the next week, the New Year's week, will be reflective of stuff that happened or, stuff that I would have talked about during the Christmas week. Unfortunately, I will be gone during the Christmas week, and I will be coming back the week after. And so because of that, I've been working and trying to have more content coming out and produced and ready to go in the background here, just to make sure we do have an episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod and corresponding clips coming out that week of New Year's. And so here's the deal. We will definitely have clips and podcasts coming out every single day for the foreseeable future. That is not going to change. Next week's episode, though, is going to look a little bit different because I'm not going to be able to record and talk about the new episodes, for example, of Creature Commando, Skeleton Crew, or Dune Prophecy. And so we'll be talking about those in the week after's episode, which is episode 56. So in episode 55, which is coming out after this in about a week, we will not be talking about the recent news if anything drops, although honestly, I highly doubt it. I think the Superman trailer is probably one of the last things that happens in terms of breaking news at the end of the year, but we'll see. There might be more to talk about. But for episode 55, we're not going to be able to talk about new shows or new breaking news or things like that. Instead, what I've decided to do is make the Access Blockbusters Pod a look back on 2024 and a look forward to 2025. So we will have just 3 segments in that episode, although the episode did turn out to be about an hour long. So there's a lot to talk about, and I'll release those 3 individual segments as individual clips in the upcoming weeks, because I think, people might be interested in hearing that if they're not interested in listening to the whole podcast. Those 3 clips, though, those 3 segments will be a ranking of my top 10 favorite films that came out in 2024. I'm really excited to share that with you guys, and I'm really excited to hear what you guys have to say in the comments. I will still probably be able to respond to comments no matter where I am, and so just feel free to fire away, let me know about comments and or let me know what your thoughts in the comments. The second segment is going to be predicting the top 10 box office films in terms of worldwide gross in 2025. So I think that'll be a fun exercise as well. And then the final one will be my top 10 most anticipated films of 2025. I think that's going to be exciting to just look ahead to I think a really exciting year in terms of movies. And so that will be the next episode of the Access Blockbusters pod. Now, if you're thinking, well, that's only 4 days worth of content, because that's, the Access Blockbusters pod episode 55 is one day, the 2024 ranking, the 2025 box office, and the 2025 anticipated list, that's only 4 days. And I did say I was going to have content coming out for you every single day. Have no fear. The remaining 3 days, I've been waiting patiently to release these videos, but we've just been on such a grind with the normal Access Blockbusters pod. But I mentioned this a long time ago. When we first started, if you guys remember, many, many months ago, I think in August, when we first started our DCEU rewatch, and I have a podcast up, which is a look back on Man of Steel. And I think that was awesome. It was really fun to rewatch that. And since then, in the background, I've been slowly producing these episodes just in case for times like this, where there maybe isn't as much news, or, I'm away and I want to release these episodes for you guys, and sooner rather than later. I didn't anticipate it being 4 months between episodes, which is kind of crazy. But in those 3 remaining days, after these 4 clips and podcasts come out, we will be releasing 3 episodes of... I'm going to make these individual episodes of the Access Blockbusters pod because they're all kind of, they're an hour long each about. And I think that there's enough substance in there to make them their own individual episodes. But they will be coming out 3 days in a row. We will have... So just in terms of schedule, just to take a look back here, or to zoom out. Next week, this episode actually, first of all, is episode 54. Next week is episode 55. That is the 2024-2025 look back, the one that I produced a while ago in advance of me leaving. And then episode 56 will not be a regularly scheduled, normal Access Blockbusters pod. Episode 56 will be coming out the next day, and it will be a look back on Batman v Superman. Episode 57 will come out the next day. It will be a look back on Wonder Woman, on the Suicide Squad. And then the next episode, episode 58, will be coming out, I believe, that Friday. So January 3rd, I want to say. And that will be a look back on Wonder Woman. At that point, I should be all caught up. We should be good to go. And the next week's episode will be ready. And in that episode, episode 59 of the Access Blockbusters pod, we will be doing our usual... It'll be probably a longer episode because I want to recap Dune Prophecy. I want to talk all about Dune Prophecy. At that point, it will be over. And so I'll do a recap of episode 6 and talk about Dune Prophecy. We'll do episodes, I think, 5 and 6 of Skeleton Crew and Creature Commandos. I think that'll be exciting. I'll also try my best to watch Squid Game Season 2. I'm very excited about that in the interim. And then hopefully we'll have a review of Squid Game Season 2 and any other news and different topics that have come out in that time. I think that'll be exciting. I know, again, long intro. That's why I wanted to preface all of this by saying there was a time code. If you didn't care about any of this, you could skip around because this episode 54, is going to be insanely long anyways. But for those of you who are interested in what's going on next week and I'm sure people will still comment being like, why is it different? Why is it? I'll just point them back to the beginning of this episode. But at any rate, I just wanted to put that here for you guys to know. So we'll be back to our regularly scheduled program in a couple weeks after the new year, which is really, really exciting. So anyways, guys, thank you so much. Also, thank you so much for 1,500 subscribers. That is unbelievable. That is crazy. I'm so grateful for the year. I'm so thankful for you guys and just the conversations that we've had and the ability to talk with one another about movies in a way that feels constructive and very, genuine. And I've been so appreciative of that. So anyways, this has been an almost 10-minute introduction. So sorry about that, guys, for those of you who have stuck around for it. But without further ado, let's get into the actual topics of episode 54 of the Access Blockbusters pod. All right, guys. So we had just talked about, actually in the last episode of the Access Blockbusters pod, we had just talked about the newly reported, I suppose, Clayface movie. But now... And it's kind of amazing how this works out, that I just finished uploading and publishing the last week's episode, that even more news starts to come out. So here we are. But hopefully this isn't too late because we have some more details about this Clayface movie, as well as just the whole DCU slate in general. So first of all, according to Deadline, we have 2 official release dates, one for Clayface and the other for the animated film, I think set in the DCU, maybe not, called Dynamic Duo, which will center around a couple of the Robins, I believe, from Batman, the Bat Family. So there is that. And again, there are not many details about Dynamic Duo, but it's, I don't even know if it's going to be set in the DCU, but we now have release dates for these 2 films. So Clayface is going to be coming out September 11th, 2026, and Dynamic Duo is, it's going to come out on June 30th, 2028. So release date, it has a release date, but it's not coming out for a long, long time. So this is the official, quote-unquote, at least what's been confirmed, the official DCU release slate. It's Superman, July 11th, 2025. Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, June 26, 2026, and then Clayface, September 11th, 2026. And so I guess Supergirl and Clayface will be the only two DCU films coming out in 2026, which leaves 2027 open for whatever else comes. And there's a lot of other stuff that needs to come. I would assume 2027 would probably be some combination of Sergeant Rock and maybe Swamp Thing is maybe my guess for 2027. Who knows? And also there are tons of other films that have been, Bane and Deathstroke, it could even be as well. So who knows? Who knows anymore? But yeah, we're not, this is what I talked about in the last episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod, or even a couple weeks ago, I think, in the last 2 weeks ago for the Access Blockbusters Pod, is that, because I talked with you guys in the comments, and some of you guys were saying, well, no, like DC just, let DC do its own thing and have every movie be standalone and stuff. That's totally fine. I'm totally okay with that. I love the Batman universe and how standalone it is. I think that the idea that Robert Pattinson's Batman could fit in this DCU just based on what we know is crazy. I mean, I don't, not crazy if you think that, but just in my perspective, at least, it would be a crazy mix. What I'm saying, though, is that just by having all these, different projects and whatnot and committing to the whole 2 movie and 2 shows kind of timeline that James Gunn alluded to earlier, is that you just won't see characters come back for a long time. The earliest, I think, we would get a Superman 2, if Superman is good, and if we all like it, is 2028, probably, which isn't bad. It's not terrible, but I'm just saying that, characters would not be able to recur super frequently in this DCU. That's all. That's the only thing I was trying to say. But anyways, yes, we have release dates for Clayface, which is going to be written by Mike Flanagan, who did Haunting of Hill House, he did Dr. Sleep, big horror, and also details were confirmed that it's going to be more horror tragedy-centric. I believe also they talked about the fact that Clayface will not be a villain. He's going to be, I don't know if a hero is the right word, but just a tragic character as well. I think that that's exciting. And now it remains to be seen who's going to be voicing / playing the character. Obviously, the big thing with Clayface is that he can shapeshift. So I'm sure there are going to be many, many personas that are, going on there with Clayface. But I think it's a really interesting character to tackle there. So we now have confirmation of 2 of these release dates, and we're getting a better picture of the full slate. Obviously, aside from, I think Booster Gold was a movie. I could be wrong. Booster Gold might be a series. So there is also that in the docket. Paradise Lost is a series. Lanterns is a series. Swamp Thing is the other movie that we're looking for. And also, totally forgot, Brave and the Bold. I guess, is Brave and the Bold coming out in 2028, 2027? I don't know. Andy Muschietti is going to direct Brave and the Bold as far as we know. So yeah, there's that. So a lot of interesting things going on here, and we'll just have to see where things go. But guys, let me know in the comments down below, what do you think about this news about Clayface? We're getting some more confirmation about what this is going to be about, what this is going to be like, the kind of tone that they're setting. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments down below, and if you're excited for the Clayface movie and for the Dynamic Duo movie as well. Alrighty, guys, Penguin was one of the shows that truly surprised me this year. And I think that, it's fair to say that there was anticipation for a show like Penguin, but to think that it could have been that good, and again, just speaking from my own personal experience, if you didn't like Penguin, totally fine. I have friends who didn't like Penguin. That's just, again, totally fine. But for me, I just thought, wow, what a phenomenal piece of television storytelling. Now, the question obviously then becomes, since Penguin himself didn't die, spoiler alert, at the end of his show, and he's going to appear in the Batman Part 2, and Matt Reeves has teased that he is going to have a future, and, after the Batman Part 2, and Colin Farrell said he signed up for a trilogy, so, again, we'll see. He might die in Batman Part 2, and then we might all be like, well, that was interesting, and Matt Reeves was just covering, but as of the recording of this podcast episode, the Penguin is said to have a future after the Batman Part 2, and the question after having a successful show like this, such a successful show, is, well, season 2, is it going to happen? Because look, you can say all you want about, other shows deserve season 2s and whatnot, but if this show is going to garner the kind of Emmy and awards consideration that it rightfully and justly deserves, then, and especially for people like Colin Farrell and Kristen Milioti, you gotta imagine there's going to be season 2. And the interesting and really great thing about this universe is that, well, this isn't a show where it's like you watch it and you go, oh, great that you want a season 2. The story's over, and you're just forcing a season or a second movie. I thought that way about Joker Folie à Deux. And again, granted, storytellers can always find ways to tell new stories with these same characters, even if it seems so final, so, the ending is so finite. Toy Story 4 is a great example of this to me. I would not have ever greenlit a Toy Story 4. I said, it's done. Toy Story 3 is one of the most beautiful endings in film, and yet here they are. They made Toy Story 4, and it's not as good, I don't think, as the previous 3, but I really like Toy Story 4. Really like Toy Story 4. They're making Toy Story 5. I'm thinking the exact same thing about it, but we'll have to see about that. So, but the thing about it is, going back to Penguin, is that I don't think Penguin's like that. I mean, depending on what happens in the Batman Part 2, I don't think he's going to be in it for that long. But, based on what Colin Farrell said, he's going to have maybe 5 or 6 scenes or whatever. And that's great. But let's just assume that the Penguin kind of ends the Batman Part 2 in a similar spot as he was at the end of the Penguin, where he is, now on the inside and he's trying to gain political power. That is season 2. Season 2 is now less of a gang war, and it's more of an inside politics war where you're talking about corruption in local government and things like that, where Penguin is trying to crawl his way up. And who knows? Who knows? I think there's precedent in the comic books. He might even be mayor by the end of the show. That would be really crazy, right? So I think that would be a very interesting angle to explore. So anyways, all that to say, we've been speculating on this, and we've been wondering, is there ever going to be a Batman or Penguin season 2? And now Matt Reeves has just done an interview. And, well, actually, I think Zoe Kravitz was interviewing him for something. I don't even know why. And she asks him, and this is just the question that she's asking him, and none of these shows, everyone's freaking out over the Penguin. And Reeves says this: yeah, we're talking to showrunner Lauren LeFranc about doing another season. That was a special experience. I just feel really fortunate. These characters don't belong to me. They belong to the world. It comes down to whether you can approach them in a way that expresses something personal. So, very interesting, because again, we gotten hints of, if there will obviously be conversations about a season 2 and whatnot. And Colin Farrell, after complaining about the makeup, which who wouldn't complain about the makeup? I mean, it took hours and hours, like 5 hours to put on the makeup and a couple hours to take it off. Who would not complain about the makeup? But after, he probably will be nominated for an Emmy, and he might even win it. I don't know. He might even win an Emmy for this. And if he does, I mean, you're coming back for season 2. And I think it's a role that he probably enjoyed a lot. Just a very different kind of role. I mean, he's one of the best actors out there right now. And I think that there's always an incentive to come back when you have a show as popular as this. Now, in terms of when that might happen, may not be for a long time, because the Batman Part 2 won't come out until 2026. And, if the Penguin Season 1 didn't come out until 2024, when the Batman Part 1 came out in 2022, I would imagine it'll be 2028, maybe, when the Penguin Season 2 comes out. And I know that they're developing other shows as well. And again, it all depends on where the Batman Part 2 leaves this character. Matt Reeves in this interview also mentioned and confirmed that they are moving full steam ahead on the Batman Part 2. They are finishing up the script right now, and they're going to film in early 2025. So here's hoping that no other production delays come out and the Batman Part 2 hits its release date, I believe, in October of 2026. It's still a long ways away, but we're getting closer. We're getting closer to returning to this universe. And in the meantime, it's great to get these shows like Penguin to tie this over. So, yeah, looks like Penguin Season 2. I would give it something like a 75% chance that Penguin Season 2 is a go. And I'd be very excited to see what they do from there. But guys, let me know in the comments down below. Do you think Penguin Season 2 is going to happen? Or do you think that they're just going to leave it here? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty, so if you've been watching the channel for a little bit, it is no secret that Thunderbolts is one of the movies of 2025 that I'm really excited about. I think that this film has potential to be very surprising, and not just for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I just think in general it has the potential to be a very surprisingly entertaining and even maybe a little bit heartfelt kind of a movie that kicks off the summer season. I'm very, very excited for Thunderbolts. One of the interesting things about this movie is the collection of characters that are in it. Most notably, the fact that Valentina Allegra Contessa De Fontaine, I believe is her full name, is the quote-unquote Nick Fury of this group. She's the one bringing everybody together, or maybe trying to split them apart. We'll see, depending on how that goes. But Val is played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who has made, I think, three previous MCU appearances thus far, which is actually a lot, if you think about just how disparate the entirety of Phase 4 and 5 has been thus far. But she first appeared in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, recruiting John Walker as U.S. agent, obviously going to be playing a big part in the Thunderbolts film, John Walker. She then appeared in the post-credit scene of Black Widow, and her actions had ramifications in the Hawkeye series because she sent Yelena to go and hunt down Clint Barton. And then she most recently appeared in Black Panther Wakanda Forever, which was a little unrelated to Thunderbolts, but maybe not, because she is the new CIA director. It was revealed she was married to Everett Ross. Scroll or pre-scroll, I don't even know. Secret Invasion. We'll talk about Secret Invasion, I'm sure, at another point, but not today. But she was the CIA director, and she was after Wakandan vibranium, or maybe just after global conflict. And who knows what her motivations were there. So this is going to be her fourth appearance, and she is going to have a very prominent role here. So they interviewed Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who plays Val, and obviously most well known for Seinfeld as Elaine, but also Veep. And she's been in a lot of things. And they interviewed her for this Entertainment Weekly profile of Thunderbolts. And she gives a lot of quotes here, and I think a couple stand out to me. So I'm going to go through this article and read out the quotes, and then we'll talk about them on the other side, because I think, again, there are some interesting things here to talk about. So, and I'm going to try to just read direct quotes from Julia Louis-Dreyfus because the Entertainment Weekly article also has their own commentary on different things. Nothing that interesting, I think, but mostly just based on her quotes. So this is her first quote here in this article, I believe. Let me just scroll down. Yep, this is her first quote here. So she says, "It's a completely different beast. This movie is a real opportunity for me to really explore the Val character. You really get to know what she's made of and even a lot of her backstory. She's in it to win it." Okay? Very interesting. The next quote here is her saying, you're going to see her entire plan unfold. I'm going to read the tag here because I think it's interesting. "You're going to see her entire plan unfold," she confirms with a smile. That's Julia Louis-Dreyfus. "It has a lot of mystery to it, and there's some twists and turns that you just don't see coming, which are the best kind. There's a lot of surprises, which is very groovy." It's a very Julia Louis-Dreyfus thing to say here. Next quote here. "Her intentions aren't necessarily pure. You've got hero, you've got anti-hero, you have villain. Is there such a thing as an anti-villain?" she asks during this interview. The next quote here is, she says, "When I got the gig, my husband got me the first Marvel." Actually, this one's not that interesting. It's just more about her talking about her comic book origins. There's another quote here where she talks about, I think she talks about the fact that she's doing this because of her kids. And then she says here, she's talking about Val, quote, "She's sort of a misfit in a strange way, even though she would not characterize herself as such. She's somebody who's definitely trying to prove herself. And in that sense, maybe she has something in common with the Thunderbolts. But that's me saying that. I'm not sure she understands that." Okay, keep scrolling. This article is pretty long, by the way. It is pretty long. Next quote. "She's about 4 steps ahead at all times, or at least she thinks she is until she's not. All these characters have worked for her under certain circumstances, so she would fancy herself as a bit of a puppet master, and she's very power hungry. She's a user of anti-heroes. She definitely sees herself as the leader, the organizer of this group, but I'm not sure that they see her as such." Very interesting. And then the next couple quotes here, she's just talking about the fact that she got to throw one punch in particular, but didn't get to do a whole lot of action here. And so, I guess that's kind of interesting. Talks about her kids here at the end and how she wants her kids to really enjoy this because her kids are very much into Marvel. Talks about the fact that she hasn't been able to get spoilers out of, or people haven't been able to get spoilers out of her. And I think that's pretty much it here. They ask her at the very end about the asterisk at the end of the Thunderbolts title, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, another day. And she simply says, "I can't tell you." Also, they touch upon the Everett Ross connection here. And the article, I don't think she directly says this, but the article says that they won't be touching upon her, but they will be touching upon her backstory. So those were the direct quotes from Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Now, a couple of interesting things here to note. Number one is that it seems like, she wants to think of herself, this character wants to think of herself as very much ahead of the game, when in reality, not so much, right? Maybe the fact that, she's kind of making it up as she goes. I almost think of it like a Penguin situation, maybe, where, Oz kind of gets away with it at certain points, and you think he's not really, he doesn't really have a plan, and maybe sometimes he doesn't have a plan, but he always manages to find himself a way out. I think that might be kind of an interesting angle to take with this Val character. But obviously, the headline of this segment here is the fact that she says, well, I guess the secondary headline here is that we're going to get some more backstory about her. But I think that leads into, the biggest reveal of this headline, which is the fact that we are going to see her entire plan unfold. So that's interesting because this is a character that's quietly been in the backdrop of the MCU thus far. And she's been doing things on the Earth side, at least, because obviously not relating to Thor or Eternals or Doctor Strange, but on the Earth side, right? All these different characters that are on the Earthbound area, she's kind of had indirect interactions with Hawkeye through Yelena Belova, obviously, John Walker, and then through John Walker, Sam Wilson as well. So all these Earthbound heroes, and then Wakanda, the CIA, all these different things. So there's been a lot of Val so far, even if she hasn't physically been on screen for a while. And I think it's interesting because now we're getting the culmination, apparently, of her entire plan, and it's hard not to imagine that it doesn't have something to do with Sentry, because, Sentry is the big part of the film. It seems like Sentry, it was sort of the coup de grace, the final resort, the last resort, or maybe just this big plan that's been cooking this whole time. And I think that that's interesting that she is saying we're going to see her whole plan. And I think this is a very good thing. Because look, the MCU in phases 4 and 5 has been very disparate, right? But I think it's finally about time we start seeing some of these storylines tied together. And if this is going to be a culmination of sorts of what Val has been up to, I think that's actually a great thing. And I can't wait to see what that is, because honestly, I think this is a character that has a lot of promise, but hasn't really delivered. And so the fact that they're giving her the spotlight in the Thunderbolts film, I think is very interesting. So I would guess I would guess that this has something to do with Sentry, and what for? I don't really know. She's power hungry, is what Julia Louis-Dreyfus said, so that could be something there. But to what end? And I'm sure we're going to find out more about her in the backstory. I think that what this says to me, honestly, is that, Julia Louis-Dreyfus is going to have a bigger role in this than I actually initially thought. I thought she might just be there to kind of pull the strings and then, pull the rug out from under the Thunderbolts at the end of the movie or whatever. But I think that actually she might be one of the more central characters to this movie, given the fact that they're going to dig into her backstory and talk about what happened there. So we'll see. We'll see. But I'm excited. The more I hear about this movie, the more that comes out of it. I'm really excited for this, and can't wait to see what happens there. So guys, let me know in the comments down below. What do you make of Julia Louis-Dreyfus's comments? And are you excited for Thunderbolts? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, a little bit of a shorter update here on a series that, well, I don't know. It looked like for a while, I was wondering about this series for a while and whether or not this was going to be a part of the whole, Marvel too much content kind of stuff. And because this series, as this article points out, I think it's from Deadline, and Deadline being one of the more reputable sources in the Hollywood movie industry, this article says this series was first put into production 2.5 years ago. And I remember it was a long time ago. I don't remember it being 2.5 years ago, so that's kind of crazy. But we have some updates now about the Marvel Cinematic Universe series Nova. Now, Nova is a character, more of the galactic cosmic side of the MCU that's related to the Nova Corps. And I believe in the comic books, many different characters have taken up the mantle of Nova. So we now have confirmation. I think we already had this confirmation, honestly. I don't think it was official, but I think someone asked Kevin Feige a while ago, like, oh, Nova series, who would you focus on? And I think he gave the answer. I could be wrong about that, but we have now confirmation from Deadline saying which character is going to be Nova, or I guess which alter ego is going to be Nova. And we also have some confirmation on a showrunner. Now, again, not too much to talk about here, but I think that just the fact that they have a showrunner here is a really good sign, and we'll talk about that in just a second. That's really why I wanted to bring this up in the first place. So, this article from Deadline says that they will now be moving ahead with Nova, and it's going to be focusing on Richard Rider, aka Nova. So, that is your confirmation that, we have Richard Rider is going to be the main focus. This show was announced 2.5 years ago, and it actually wasn't sure, they weren't sure if they were going to make it a film, a series. I think at one point, they were actually going to make it a special presentation. I could be wrong. But now they're officially going to be making it a series, and it's going to have the showrunner, and his name is, I'm scrolling through the article, Ed Bernero, who was the showrunner of Criminal Minds. Now, Criminal Minds is a show that I personally have not seen myself, but it's obviously one of the most popular shows. I think it's been around for a long, long time. In fact, how many seasons does Criminal Minds have? Let's take a look here. Criminal Minds, as Google loads the answer, Criminal Minds has 15 seasons and 324 episodes. So you want to talk about longevity here. I don't know how long Ed Bernero was on Criminal Minds for, if he was there for all 15 seasons, but this is obviously one of the most popular shows on TV in the modern era. And so getting a person like Ed Bernero to showrun Nova, and also that might give some hints, right? This might be a hint towards the fact that this might be more of a crime, kind of an intrigue series more than an action space adventure. We'll see. I know that James Gunn recently talked about Lanterns, right, being a mystery kind of series, true detective kind of series on Earth with the Lanterns. Maybe Marvel's taking a little page out of James Gunn's book here and making the Nova series more in that vein. That would be pretty interesting, right? But this is a character where, we've seen the Nova Corps in the Guardians films. They haven't really been explored too much, other than, some brief talking points here and there from Nova Prime, played by the amazing Glenn Close. So we'll see, if they dive back into Xandar, because Xandar was obviously and very sadly destroyed in Thanos' destruction in the Sacred Timeline. Who even knows, though? Just the fact that they're getting a showrunner now means that this show probably will not come out until after Secret Wars, right? So I would assume that whatever, timeline or whatever, however this takes place, it's going to be taking place in a post-Secret Wars. And I'm going to wager a guess, to say a post-multiverse MCU. So I think that's interesting. And we'll see, we'll see how much it addresses the previous iterations. Because the Nova Corps, right, by the time the series comes out, and I'm going to assume, let's just say 2027, late 2027, or maybe even early 2028, right? It's going to be a long ways away. And the Nova Corps at that point would have been first introduced in 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy, which was, I guess, 12, 13, 14 years ago before that. So kind of interesting to see there. The other interesting thing that this article points out that I totally forgot about as well is that this show actually had a writer on it. The writer was one of the writers from Moon Knight, Sabir, I'm going to mispronounce this, Pirzada, who originally was going to be the writer for this. Now, the reason I bring this up, and really, like I said, the whole reason I'm doing this segment in the first place, because I've said this before on the podcast that I don't like to do segments for the sake of doing segments to break news, because obviously these segments are not coming out right as the news is coming out, so that doesn't feel productive for me. But I always like to talk about the news insofar as I can give my thoughts and maybe even give some analysis as well. And the interesting thing about this, right, is that it seems to be really hinting towards the fact that Marvel has solidified their direction away from just having a writer's room, which is what they did, right? They, the She-Hulk show made fun of that by, at the end of the show, having her step into the writer's room. But that's literally all there was. There was just a series of writers. There was a head writer, I believe, somebody kind of like a showrunner. But now Marvel is really diving back into the traditional TV format, which we had heard about, a few months ago, or maybe even a year ago, that they were really looking into, okay, the way that we've been doing it before with the mini-series and limited formats is just not working with these writers' rooms. Let's actually have a showrunner, let's actually make a television show. And you see this now with the two shows that are coming out post Wonder Man. I don't know if Wonder Man had a showrunner, but I know that Agatha All Along had a showrunner, which was Jack Schaefer, who did WandaVision as well. And so now, the shows are going to be having showrunners like Vision and Nova, I believe, are the two series that are going to be confirmed after Wonder Man, and also Daredevil Born Again, which I believe Daredevil Born Again now has a showrunner, but Daredevil Born Again Season 2. So really, this is just a confirmation that Marvel is solidifying its approach now with television. I think that that's pretty exciting. So anyways, just some news here, is just an update on the Nova series. But again, I think that it's an exciting direction that Marvel is going. And if they want to really focus up and tighten up the quality here, then I think this is a good sign. So let me know in the comments down below, are you excited for a Nova series? Me personally, don't have too much attachment to this character from the comics, so just interested to see what the MCU can do from here. Let me know in the comments down below. All right, here we are again. So, and I've gone through this before, so if you haven't checked out the podcast segment I did a little bit ago where I talked about how I produced the podcast, this is one of the points of frustration for me, is that I am not able to make, these segments and publish them immediately as soon as the news comes out. And so because of that, I try to have the podcast be as timely as possible, but sometimes I record and produce and upload and schedule segments that come out, and right before these segments come out, a piece of news comes out that immediately negates it. So we have to wait until the next week's episode to talk about it. Case in point, in the last week's episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod, I believe episode 53, because this is episode 54, I said, based on a report, that it looks like the Sony universe, after Kraven, is dead. And then a couple days later, what happens? A report from Variety, which, again, Variety, very reputable source in the Hollywood industry, comes out and says, actually, surprise, the Sony Spider-Man universe is not dead after Kraven the Hunter. Now, there's a little bit of nuance here, because, again, there's enough to talk about, just in that concept alone, the fact that, okay, just kidding, they're not killing this universe. But actually, within this article, there are some very interesting quotes that I want to talk about, because I think, sure, the news could just be Sony Spider-Man universe is not dead, but I think the behind-the-scenes insights into this, some of the things that actually other people are speculating about and analyzing with, like why Sony did what they did and why they're making the decisions that they're making, I actually disagree with some of them. And so we're going to talk about them. I pulled out from this article. You can go read the whole article. It's on Variety. If you just look up, Sony Universe or Kraven the Hunter, and you look up Variety, it'll come up for you. But I pulled out, I think, 5 or 6 quotes here that I want to talk about. The whole article basically details the fact that, well, sure, Kraven the Hunter, not very good. They acknowledge Morbius and Madam Web, not very good. But they're not killing the universe because there really wasn't any universe to begin with. And, like they can just keep making these movies and they don't necessarily have to be connected to one another. So I'm going to read through a couple quotes. I'm going to read through each quote, and then we're going to talk about what it means and what I think it means and why I might disagree with some of them. So let's look at this first quote here. This first quote says, and I'm just going to read it out and then we'll talk about it. Quote, "For one thing, technically speaking, there never really was a Sony Marvel Universe or a Sony Spider-Man Universe or any other official designation akin to the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the newly relaunched DC Universe. Sony has never approached its comic book adaptations with that level of intentional narrative cohesion, as exemplified by the studio's casual, lowercase, and rhetorically ungainly phrasing for a superhero film. Sony's universe of Marvel characters, end quote. Okay, so the thesis here, right? The assertion in this quote is that, well, is the Sony universe dead? Not really, because was there ever really a Sony universe to begin with? To which I say, okay, I'm willing to buy the premise of this. I think your actions, though, speak louder than words. And what I'm really looking at, honestly, is 2 things. I'm looking at Venom Let There Be Carnage, and I'm looking at Morbius. Now, I'm looking at Venom Let There Be Carnage because, you can say all you want that, no, I mean, sure, we were just looking to make some spin-off Spider-Man universe characters and there was never really anything going on with them. Okay, then why in the world were you trying to cross over Venom into the MCU for a little bit? That doesn't seem like it's very self-contained at all. But fine, I mean, maybe that's not an argument about how the Sony characters are tied together. That's just an argument about how much more Sony wanted the Venom character to be in the MCU, not the Sony universe. Okay, fine. Let's look at Morbius. What in the world were we doing bringing Michael Keaton over, right? There are hints to Spider-Man in every single one of these projects. There are hints even towards one another in a couple of these projects. What in the world are we doing? Just pretending the fact that, no, these projects aren't really related to one another. I mean, sure. In a vacuum, you can say, well, in hindsight, none of these projects actually, like, you didn't see Morbius show up in Madame Web and etc. Okay, fine, whatever, fine. Insofar as though the first Iron Man was not really connected to the first Thor, not really connected to the first Captain America, sure, fine. But, I mean, they were all hinting towards one another, they all had a couple things in common, and they were all making attempts to connect to each other. So, you know, for this quote here, the premise I can accept. Okay, fine. Sure, there really isn't a formalized Sony universe of Spider-Man characters. Like, they're not building towards the Sinister Six. Even then, I have my doubts that they weren't even thinking about that. I feel like they were at some point, but fine, whatever. But in execution, I still think that it's a little facetious to be like, there never was anything here, guys. What are you talking about, Sony universe of Spider-Man characters? But fine, that's just my opinion. Okay. Let's move on to the second quote here. This is talking about I think the more financial side of the Sony universe. So, quote, Sony's insiders also fiercely defend the success of the 3 Venom films starring Tom Hardy, which have earned more than $1.8 billion worldwide. The latest film, Venom: The Last Dance, has earned it the lowest gross yet of the franchise, $473 million, especially against the $856 million global take for 2018's Venom. But The Last Dance cost $120 million, thrifty for a superhero movie, and it improved on the international grosses of 2021's Venom: Let There Be Carnage. So there's really no financial reason for Sony to stop making Venom movies anytime soon. This one I completely agree with. People are like, what in the world are you talking about? These movies are tanking, they're bombing everywhere. And yes, Madame Web tanked. Morbius didn't do well, although they insist Morbius made a profit. They say that in the article somewhere. I don't know how Morbius could have possibly made a profit, but fine, whatever. You insist on whatever you want. Madame Web bombed. Kraven the Hunter is going to bomb. But, I mean, guys, these Venom films, 3 Venom films, averaged $600 million each. And they cost probably at most $150 million, and this last one cost $120 million. These movies made massive profits for Sony. And on top of that, we also often forget, that Sony is getting the vast majority of the profits from the Spider-Man films. Those 3 Spider-Man films, which, by the way, have made almost a combined $4 billion. So, just to say, oh, you know, they're not making any money or whatever. It's not money. Like, there are problems with the Sony universe, and this article talks about the fact that there are critical problems with the Sony universe, and they understand that Morbius and Madame Web were big failures, and I'm sure they're going to think the same thing about Kraven, and there's a reason for that we'll talk about in a second, related to quality control and the fact that there is none. But in terms of money, guys, no, there is, for Sony at least. It's not like Sony sitting here going, oh no, it's just burning a hole of cash, you know, we don't have any money anymore. No, these movies are making the money. And so I think that that's an argument that we can't, for the time being at least, because if 3 more kind of Kraven films come out and they lose $200 million each from each movie, then you might start having a conversation there. Even a Venom 4, if they ever decide to make a Venom 4 with a different character, I'm sure is probably going to make less, and then maybe we have that conversation. But no, I don't think money is necessarily the problem here with Sony. Let's move on to their this third quote here, and the rest of the article is going to reference this guy. It says his title is Exhibitor Relations Analyst. His name is Jeff Bach, and he has some takes here. And I, frankly, just to be upfront, am not going to agree with a lot of what he says, because I think that some of what he says is true, and some of what he says is, I think, very superficial. So we're going to read this third quote here, and it says, quote, this is a quote from Jeff Bach. So this Variety article is now quoting this guy named Jeff Bach. So Jeff Bach says, quote, all of these characters are famous because they went up against Spider-Man, end quote, says Exhibitor Relations Analyst Jeff Bach. Quote, unfortunately for Sony, they had a taste of success with Venom, and that kind of spoiled everything for them because they thought they could just spin off all of these characters. I don't think they realized that Venom could carry a franchise, whereas these other characters could not. To not have Spider-Man in these films was the fatal flaw. Completely 100% disagree with this. I cannot stress enough how much I disagree with this quote. This is not the reason that these films that were not Venom films failed. Those films failed because they were bad movies. And I say bad, you know me, right? If you've been watching the channel. I'm not saying bad as a prescriptive thing. If you enjoyed any one of those films, that's amazing. I'm saying critically, they were panned. People hated those movies, generally speaking, right? I'm not saying for you individually. I'm just saying generally speaking, they were panned. People said the writing was terrible, the directing was terrible, some of the acting was terrible. Hint, hint, Madam Web, hint, hint. And the reason those three movies, Madam Web, Morbius, and Kraven the Hunter, were bad movies was because they were bad movies, not because they didn't have Spider-Man in them. I don't know who this person is, Jeff Bach, and I again, no disrespect to you at all or anything like that, but this is a completely inaccurate statement, in my opinion, because no, these films, if these three films, let's just say Madam Web, Morbius, and Kraven the Hunter averaged around the 80% Rotten Tomato mark, and they each made about $300 to $400 million. Nobody's talking about Spider-Man. The fact that Venom was successful was because the first film, critically panned, sure, but the audiences really liked it, and it made $800 million. The second film had about a 60% Rotten Tomato score, and people liked it, and it made a lot of money. The third film, again, to a lesser degree, but people like this Tom Hardy Venom dynamic. And that's why these films are successful, not because it didn't have Spider-Man. This quote baffles me, honestly. I looked at the article again, and I don't know where this is coming from, but because this quote just kind of baffles me. But anyways, we'll move on from there. So then, the fourth quote here. This is, I think, going back to the Variety article, and this is a little bit of a longer one, so we're going to read through this one as well. Okay. Quote, according to one Sony source, the deal with Disney never precluded Sony from using Spider-Man in its movies that didn't bear his name. The Spider-Verse movies, profusion of Peter Parker's, Gwen Stacy's, and other various Spider people certainly bears that out. But there was a feeling within the studio that audiences would not accept Holland's Spidey suddenly popping up in a live-action film that wasn't a part of the MCU, especially after Spider-Man No Way Home and the Marvel Studios projects Loki and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness established definitive boundaries to the Marvel multiverse. This one, again, I think is fair because and we'll get to a quote at the very end of this article that talks about what a potential solution to this could be, but in fairness, I do think that the idea that Tom Holland, without a very clear narrative reason for the multiverse, because we're now establishing multiverse rules, and I think it's totally fair because Spider-Man No Way Home was about the multiverse, that if you see Tom Holland appear next to Venom, which I think they would have loved to have had happen, I think it would have really confused a lot of people who are just following the MCU if in a trailer it was, Tom Holland fighting Venom, and they were like, what is this? Is this MCU? What do I have to watch Venom now? I think they were worried about probably damaging the relationship between Disney and Marvel, or Disney and Sony, because I think that it was well within their rights to be able to do that, to have Tom Holland's Spider-Man just show up in Venom. They could have easily done that, but I think that they were very worried about the fact that it would have been confusing for people, and I think that that is actually pretty fair, honestly. So there is that. Okay, let's move on here to this. This is another. They're quoting a producer, it looks like, and so this is from the Variety article. So this is the Variety article talking, and then they're going to quote a producer. So Variety says, quote, dancing around Spider-Man without ever getting to use him also contributed to the feeling that these spin-off films were merely exercises in, Craven opportunism. Quote, you can feel the cynicism a mile away, end quote, says a veteran producer. Quote, they're grinding out a product and it feels like it. There's no quality control, end quote. This one, I agree with. I think that, the fact that there was no quality control, I think was very evident by the fact that they literally rehired the writers of Morbius to write Madam Web, which is crazy. It was a crazy thing for them to do. But I also think that it didn't matter because they were like, well, we can't use Spider-Man, so then what are we going to do? We're just going to make these movies, And I think that is one of the downfalls of this cinematic, or not cinematic universe, but whatever this shared universe ended up being. So I think that's also very interesting. And finally, this last quote here is also Jeff Bach. And I think that, for however much I disagreed with that first quote, I think this one is an interesting one. So the Variety article is going to start off here, and then it's going to transition into a quote from Jeff Bach. So the Variety article says, quote, there is a different possibility as well. And then quoting Jeff Bach, quote, you could hire a different Spider-Man, Bach says. It doesn't have to be Tom. I agree with this. I think, there were rumors about Andrew Garfield coming back. Fine. You could have a different Spider-Man. And there have been people in the comments being like, no, you can't have multiple Batman or multiple Superman or multiple Spider-Man. Yes, you can. You totally can. In a year, within, I think, about 12 to maybe 16 months worth of time, we had 3 separate Batmen on the big screen. Granted, for sure, 2 of them were in the same movie, so it was a little less confusing. But we had Ben Affleck, we had Michael Keaton, and we had Robert Pattinson, all in the span of basically a year and a half. I don't think people are going to be that confused if we have 2 Spider-Men going on in the universe, especially because of the multiverse. I think the multiverse does a lot to just be like, okay, just different universes, we'll figure it out. I think, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe if they did this, then people would be like, wait, what? It's not Tom Holland? But, I mean, we have Miles Morales going on. Granted, I know it's animated and whatever, but we have Miles Morales going on, Peter Parker. We can have another Peter Parker. It's fine. We can just have another universe. We had 2 or 3 different Jokers going on at the same time. We have 2 or 3 different Batman going on at the same time. And we're going to, as well, with whoever the Brave and the Bold Batman is and the Robert Pattinson's Batman. So, again, I just think, look, this article is clearly stating... it's stating the fact that there were problems within the Sony Spider-Man universe, within, the production and the behind the scenes and whatnot. Is it saying definitively that, well, just because, we're saying that the Sony universe is not dead means that Venom 4 is in production right now? No, I don't think so. I think elsewhere in the article they talk about the fact that they're going to be a little more discerning and a little more choosy about how and where and when which characters show up. And I think that that's a good thing. But ultimately, I feel like the headline here, which again is true. I never try to lie to you guys and to have false headlines and things. So it is true, sure, that the Sony universe, the Sony Spider-Man universe, is not dead after all. But I think it's less of the fact that we were tricked and whatever. But I think it's more the fact that I think they're trying to be a little more cautious now, and maybe they're dialing it back. Maybe at first, with my whole Michael Keaton Vulture thing and Morbius thing, they were like, maybe we want a big shared cinematic universe. And now at this point, I think that they are just sort of backing off. And I'm sure they will be making more movies. Like, even when that decision came out, or whatever that report was that said the Sony universe was dead, I was like, are we sure about that? I'm sure they are probably going to eventually make more Sony Spider-Man universe movies. And it turns out that what this really meant is that they're going to make more movies, just like we thought. But, they're going to make it more like, well, they don't all have to be related to one another, rather than having a quote-unquote reboot of the old universe. Because they're basically trying to say, well, they never were connected in the first place, so we can just make more movies, if that makes sense. It's really interesting, this whole saga. We'll have to see. I don't think we're going to get anything in 2025. Probably early 2026 at the earliest. We'll get another of these, spin-off character films, but we'll have to see how it goes from there. Guys, let me know in the comments down below what you think about this news. Sony Universe is dead, and then it's not dead. What do you think about that? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, guys, so this would be, I guess, bigger news. There's 2 news stories here that came out of this Variety article. There's been a lot of movie news this week, but anyways, coming out of this Variety article here, there's 2 pieces of news. The big one is the headline, but honestly, the headline is what we already knew, thanks to Denzel Washington, and that is that Black Panther 3 is a full go. The other piece of news is interesting to me. It's the fact that Nate Moore, who is one of the biggest producers in Marvel, is stepping away after 14 years. He was there in the early days of Iron Man. I think that's, I don't know, it's interesting. We'll see how that affects the company. We'll see if that reflects anything going on. Now, to be fair, because I think that this is an interesting pattern that we'll talk about, where now first Victoria Alonso left, and that was a whole separate situation that went on there, and now Nate Moore is leaving. So we'll see if this, this means anything, if we can read into it at all. I don't think so, honestly. It might just be time. You work at any company for 14 years, even if it's Marvel Studios, and it's, people might just want to be moving on. But let's first talk about the headline here. So the Variety article comes out here, and the title of this Variety article is producer Nate Moore leaving Marvel Studios after 14 years will still work on Black Panther 3. So obviously everyone gravitates towards the second part of that headline, which is we'll still work on Black Panther 3. And this is a little different than Denzel Washington because, Denzel is Denzel, and we want to take his word as, truth, but maybe he had just, for those of you who don't remember, a couple weeks ago, Denzel Washington was like, yeah, I'm going to retire, but I'm going to do a bunch of projects before I retire. One of them being Black Panther 3 with Ryan Coogler, who's writing a part for me. And, it's pretty much confirmation that Black Panther 3 is in the works, but it could also have been just something like, oh, well, Denzel told me once that he'd eventually write a part for me in a third Black Panther movie, and that was never, confirmation of anything. But this is official confirmation. This is actually about as official can be, because this is coming directly from Kevin Feige himself. So Kevin Feige and Louis D'Esposito, one of the really high up executive producers. In fact, I think they say here in the article co-president Louis D'Esposito here, both put out a statement, And they said this: Nate is a fantastic executive and colleague, as well as a wonderful friend to all of us here at Marvel Studios. He has been a core member of the team since 2010, and his influence will continue to reverberate in our storytelling. Although we'll miss him a great deal, we look forward to watching what he does next. And here's the key part: while also having the good fortune of working with him in a new way on our next Black Panther movie. And then Nate Moore himself puts out a statement here, and he says, he's talking about how lucky he was to be at Marvel, and then he says at the very end of the statement, but I couldn't be more excited to apply my experience and passion for film towards theatrical movies in all genres, including returning to the world of Wakanda for Black Panther 3. So these are official confirmations. And Nate Moore has been, again, with Marvel for a long, long time, since 2010, almost since the very, very beginning. And so I think it's noteworthy to see a departure like this. Whether or not this affects the MCU in a significant way, quality-wise, is not something we're going to know for a long, long time, because the kinds of projects that he was producing will probably not even be out for quite a while here. So it says he's going to be staying on until March, until the end of when Captain America Brave New World comes out, and then he will be departing and working on independent producing, it looks like. So anyways, I think it's interesting, but also, again, Black Panther 3 officially in the works here. I think this is the first official confirmation of anything. I know we all are speculating about Doctor Strange 3 and Shang-Chi 2. Please, Shang-Chi 2. Please make Shang-Chi 2. But this is coming from Kevin Feige himself. So it looks like after Secret Wars, Black Panther 3 will be one of the first films that they will be making, which I think is exciting. I personally love Wakanda Forever. I adore the first Black Panther, and I can't wait to see what they do here, especially with the brewing war between Talokan and Wakanda and the rest of the world, with Vibranium and Adamantium's coming in Brave New World. So a lot of interesting stuff to go around there. And then, hopefully we get our Shang-Chi 2, Doctor Strange 3, as well as obviously some other projects from newer characters, Armor Wars somewhere eventually, Blade somewhere eventually. So, but they have a lot of projects to work on, for sure, in the post-Secret Wars era of the MCU. But guys, let me know what you think about this news. Is it exciting to you that Black Panther 3 is officially confirmed by Kevin Feige? And also, what do you think about the news that Nate Moore has left Marvel, or is going to leave Marvel? Do you think this is going to be a big deal, a big blow, or do you think that, things will be fine? And obviously Nate Moore did a great job, but it's, they'll find another talented producer as well. Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty, guys, let's talk episode 5 of Dune Prophecy. Just like always, even though this is the second to last episode, doesn't mean anything's going to change on the Access Blockbusters pod. This is going to be a full spoiler discussion for Dune Prophecy episode 5. So if you have not seen episode 5, just make sure to save this segment, save the podcast, save this video for later once you have, and then come back and join us as we talk all things spoilers for Dune Prophecy. And this episode in particular has some spoilers in it. Whether or not that means anything for the quality of the episode, in my personal opinion, you'll have to find out. But there are some interesting things to talk about in terms of spoilers. So that was just me stalling for a little bit. If you haven't seen the episode yet, it's final warning, and let's get into episode 5. As always, look, this is where I'm coming from for Dune Prophecy, because I think it's important, as always, to set up some context, even if you've been a part of the channel before, just kind of a helpful reminder for where I've been coming from. So I've been a big fan of the Dune books. I read Dune and Dune Messiah. I really enjoyed Dune Part 1, Dune Part 2, really excited for Dune Messiah or Dune Part 3, whatever they're going to call it. And I was excited for the show. And the show started, episodes 1 and 2, I thought were, really good, solid build-up episodes that could have led to a really solid, grand story that they had going on for them. Unfortunately, I think then came the restraints of this is a 6-episode series, and even though each episode is an hour long, which is, nothing, or the MCU for comparison is, their 6-episode series, nothing compared to the amount of screen time that we get with these characters. And yet, it feels like there were 8 episodes worth of story. There was 8 episodes worth of story packed into 6 episodes, because the last 2 episodes have felt very, very choppy. And I think the amount of subplots that they're introducing with, at the end of the last episode, and I have to admit, I'm going to say this up front here, I've misspoken a few times. I don't want to say misspoken, because I've made assertions just based on things that I thought I saw, and it turns out that those things aren't true. So, for example, I talked a lot in the episode 3 spoiler discussion of, Ori Atreides is Vorian, because my mind just kind of made the leap of, that's why it makes sense that his name is Ori and then Vorian. It turns out I did some research into the Dune lore. That's not true at all. Ori and Vorian are 2 different characters, as an example. So that's something that my mind just jumped to that is completely not true. The other thing was, at the end of the last episode, I was like, who in the world is that shapeshifter? And maybe I was, just too eager to start recording this segment or whatever. But it turns out, it's Theodosia. So, things like that. And I don't want to say it's completely not my fault, because I'm sure I'm just I'm not seeing some things here and there, and that's on me. But I also think that it is a function of the show that a lot of things just happen, and you're kind of meant to be like, oh, am I supposed to know what's going on, or is this intentionally being kept from me, etc., etc. And so we head into episode 5. The big question that I keep asking myself, and we finally get half of an answer to it, because we get the objective answer, I believe, but we don't understand the why. And I think that's also important, but we get the objective answer of who is Desmond Hart really. Turns out, and they didn't explicitly say this, but this is, so again, if I look back on this now and say, oh, you were completely wrong, sorry about that, but I'm 95% sure he is Tula and Ori's son. Okay, great, we have that answer. Why? And also the question of why he gets his sandworm powers, I have no idea. So we're going to talk about all these different things as I've written notes as always, and we're going to go through them. But I think this episode, again, is just a microcosm of the show, is that, there are some great scenes going on, some great subplots going on, some very intricate and delicate maneuvering going on, and yet nothing seems to be fitting together in the way that I think, just makes everything click, if that makes sense. So we'll talk about all that as we go through our notes here and start out at the beginning. So I have to say, despite my misgivings about the last couple episodes, this show still is exceptionally well shot. I think that that's something that, I always like to take a step back here with things that I don't like, or things that I don't like generally, and say, okay, but what is the show, or what is this property doing well? And this show is exceptionally well shot. It does feel like it could be a part of the Denis Villeneuve universe, and I think that is very cool. So we jump in here, and Carino has an army that is being led by Desmond, and it seems like he's turning, the Imperium into a kind of military dictatorship. And then we get introduced to Sister Francesca, who is Constantine's mother. And now Constantine is a character that I really wish we got a lot more of throughout this show. It seems like we're finally getting a focus on him now. Seems a little bit too late. And, from the beginning, like, he showed up very early on in episode 1. And if you remember from my spoiler discussions from episode 1, I was like, yeah, no, I don't trust this guy. Then you kind of saw some vulnerability from him in this episode in particular, but then he goes back to being, kind of an untrustworthy guy at the end of this episode, because he betrays Inez, essentially, he betrays Kieran Atreides, but, also Inez, and bows before his father's approval, which I think is, kind of sketchy. So it's something that I wish they had focused on a little bit more, because I think that would have been interesting. And now introducing his mother as a character, because, we heard about the fact that he was Inez's half-brother, not full brother. And so I think that was something that could have been explored earlier on, but it is what it is. And so, yeah. And so then we get now back to Wallach 9, and we go back to Sister Jen, who is that young acolyte. And the interesting thing, what's another thing that's just not explained in this episode but brought up again, is why Sister Jen is not having these same dreams that everyone else seems to be having here. And the other thing I'm curious about is what Tula's obsession with Lila is, really. Other than just, Tula being a generally good person, I think in the show she's seen more like most as the character who is not necessarily, she's doing some questionable things, but it seems like out of all the characters, she's doing these questionable things out of more genuine motives. But it's interesting what her obsession is with Lila, other than just the fact that she wants to save her life. But there seems to be some more there that, is not fully being explored here. I also wish we got more of a connection between Jen and Lila. I know we got some scenes between them in the first couple episodes, but this whole doe eyes thing and this whole, oh, she was your best friend, so you should stay with her. I didn't feel any of that. I was just like, okay, I'm being told this, but it doesn't feel like, it's actually resonating with me as an audience member. We head back to Salusa Secundus and Theodosia. So, not Theodosia, but, Harrow, right, goes into Desmond Hart's office, and he's like, hey, I have some information for you. Let's make a trade. And I actually thought, because now I knew that Theodosia was the shapeshifter, I was like, oh, this is certainly, this is probably Theodosia just pretending to be Harrow. Turns out that's not the case, and they have this kind of conversation where basically Valia is leaking information about the rebels and the rebellion to Desmond Hart because reasons. Honestly, I'm still trying to think about why, and I don't know. There are a lot of things that are just going on here. And at this point, also in the show, I was, in the episode, I was like, I still don't know who Desmond Hart is, by the way. So there's that. We get a big focus also in this episode about the Atreides rebellion plot, which I'm not gonna lie, I'm not super invested in it, even with the twists and turns of, the Michaela, she's a Fremen and she's also a sister. And I'm like, okay, but we don't know anything else about her. So I felt like I wasn't that invested in her. My little hints of excitement in this episode, though, were when the blood sample from Valia, which is Desmond Hart's blood, got sent to Wallach 9 to Tula, which I was like, okay, we're getting somewhere. And then that also was not brought up until the very end of the episode, which of course it was. The mystery of who those two eyes are behind the sandworm. I hope this is not the case of they're like, wait until season 2 and you'll find out who those eyes are really meant to be. Because they keep talking about Shai-Hulud, who I believe, again, if anyone knows much more about Dune lore, then let me know in the comments below. But I believe Shai-Hulud is referring to a sandworm, right? But I think the drawings are implying that there is another being behind the sandworms. Whether or not it's just Desmond Hart or whatever this reckoning is, I don't know. And in part, because of all this stuff that's going on here, Raquella basically takes over Lila's body, which I thought was a pretty cool concept. It was interesting to see Raquella, quote unquote, come back to life. And she pinpoints the fact that that this is an RNA virus that basically killed Kasha and I guess the boy. Does this mean that every single person has this RNA virus and Desmond is able to activate it somehow? Because again, they're trying to science it, right? Like, they could have easily left it at, and I know the Dune lore is much more technical, so I'm sure that this is all part of it, but, they could have just left it at, it was some magic power given to him by the sandworm, but they're trying to science it, which means, okay, totally good, but then that means there has to be a very rational and logical explanation for why Desmond Hart is able to do what Desmond Hart can do. That part is still unanswered, and that part is still rather frustrating for me as well. So, anyways, we find out that Harrow was indeed not Theodosia, and he was just kind of playing along with his aunt. And great. I don't know what's going on there. But we head back to, so now we get to Kieran Atreides and Michaela. We get the revelation that Michaela is a sister, and she's also a Fremen. And then they blow up the place while Desmond is hanging out there, and he completely survives. No idea why. No idea why he's able to do anything that he's able to do, but we kind of just have to go with it here. We also then get more scenes between Constantine and his mother. Again, nothing uninteresting about this. This is fine. This is all well and good. I just wish that we had gotten this earlier, and this feels like another subplot. This feels just like another subplot. And he also asks his mother what his purpose is, and his mother's like, your purpose is to protect your half-sister Inez. And I'm like, okay, that's great and all, and obviously he does a terrible job of that later on in this episode, but it just, none of it feels set up. It just kind of feels like we're being told things when we're supposed to be told things, and it doesn't feel like everything's being paced well. If that makes sense. I think pacing is really the biggest weakness of the show for me. Also, the fact that Kieran Atreides just leaves all of his spy secrets in a locker where Constantine can just rat him out from. That's crazy to me. I mean, maybe this isn't something that would have bothered me if the rest of the show was just firing on all cylinders, but that's crazy that that's how he got ratted out and sent to prison. And also we always knew that Constantine was a snake and that he would not do the right thing when it came time to it. And at the dinner scene, you can see Inez and Inez's mother's face. And now these two characters, because they're both livid, basically. Now these two characters go in very different directions, because Inez's mother goes and, she allies with Desmond Hart, and that's concerning. But then also Inez goes back to Kieran Atreides, and it seems like he's telling the truth and he really is loyal to her. And this is what I'm talking about, right? This is what I was talking about earlier in the immediate reaction and earlier on in the spoiler discussion, is that I feel like the center of this show should have been Kieran and Inez. I feel like from the beginning, the best parts of the show were those two characters, their dynamics, how they were, because again, it's not like, that doesn't, that would take away the focus from the sisterhood. No, because the first episode sets up the fact that Inez was going to be trained under the sisterhood. So you could have had these two characters be a part of the main story, like the A story, while also having the sisterhood involved. And instead, I don't know why they didn't focus on this. And I know that they're trying to adhere to Dune lore. I did some research, and apparently a lot of the events of this story are based on one of the books that Frank Herbert's son wrote, which is okay. Great. I know that Frank Herbert's son wrote a lot of the Dune books after Frank Herbert passed away. So that's, you have to adhere to lore and stuff. And I totally get it, but I think it's more of just a shifting of the focus of the show, because again, they've already, from what I've heard, they've already taken some liberties here, and they've basically not like changed the entire lore, but just taken some liberties to focus on different things and whatnot, taking inspiration from different things. And so I wish that these two characters had really gotten more of the spotlight. After all. And so now we have the situation where, okay, it's the Emperor's wife, and it's Desmond, and then it's I guess Francesca and the Emperor, and kind of Desmond, and I don't know, Kieran and Inez are going off somewhere, the sisters are going off somewhere. It's all just kind of a mess that I wonder how they're going to resolve in the last episode. And then we finally find out who Desmond Hart is. He is an Atreides. He is a Harkonnen. It took me 2 seconds, and I was like, who in this show is, potentially could have been an Atreides and a Harkonnen? Tula, and then Tula has that reaction, and I'm like, okay. So Tula and Ori is what I'm presuming. Now, in the show, I guess so far in the show we haven't seen Tula have the capacity to have had a child. I don't think with Ori, because she kills Ori right after they're together, and so maybe there is some backstory that will be revealed at the beginning of next episode where she becomes pregnant and has a child right after that, and that is Desmond Hart. Potentially that's what's going to happen here. Again, don't know too much about the actual lore part of it, so who knows what's going to happen here, but very interesting that we have a Harkonnen Atreides. Still though, doesn't explain his powers, still doesn't explain why he's able to do what he's doing, what he saw on Arrakis, all those different things. So the show, again, is just this frustrating mix of almost there, revealing these things up until a point and then being like, but you gotta wait until next episode. And I'm like, I don't really want to wait until next episode, but here we are, guys, here we are. We are reaching the end of Dune Prophecy, and we will talk about this in a future episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod. We'll do a full breakdown of episode 6, and we'll talk about my thoughts on the series as a whole. But honestly, at this point, I think it's been pretty clear. This show had a lot of potential. Show has a lot of potential. I'm hoping episode 6 can wrap it up in a way that's pretty satisfying based on what we've gotten so far. I don't know yet, but guys, I'm just hoping that 6 is able to lead us into a place where, we look back on this show and go, it was good, really solid, but I think there's potential for season 2. And then if that's where they're going to go, then that's where they're going to go. So guys, let me know what you thought in episode 5 of Dune Prophecy, and let me know if you're excited for the finale, or if maybe you are, a little nervous, or if you're, looking forward to season 2 potentially, if there is one. Let me know what you're thinking about all this in the comments down below. Alright guys, let's talk Creature Commandos episode number 4. So, this is going to be a full spoiler discussion. If you have not seen Creature Commandos episode 4, then make sure to just save this video, save this segment, save this podcast, whatever medium or format you're listening to the Access Blockbusters Pod on. Just save it for later and come back once you have seen the episode. Let's get into it. Without further ado, Creature Commandos episode 4 spoiler discussion. So, as always, with a little bit of context here, I'm not gonna say I've disliked the show thus far with the first 3 episodes, but I haven't been loving it. I think it's fine, because honestly, the first 3 episodes of Creature Commandos is exactly what I had feared when I was coming into the show. And that's not to say that, what I feared was that the show was going to be a disaster or anything like that. No, I have faith in James Gunn because of the 5 previous superhero projects that he's done, the 3 Guardians of the Galaxy films, Peacemaker, and the Suicide Squad. They've all been really, really solid, really good films and shows, right? So I had faith in him. But the first 3 episodes to me was James Gunn at his most James Gunn. And sometimes I feel, for me personally, this is just my personal taste, it brings out the too much goofiness out of him, and it brings out just this too cynical and kind of I don't know, it's just the same formula over and over again. And so I think that it's fine, like the Bride of Frankenstein episode and the G.I. Robot episode, it's all fine. But honestly, at the end of the day, I was like, this show, if it's probably just going to end up being the same, and every episode you're going to dig into a character and maybe find them interesting, and then they might die at the end of the episode or whatever, and then we move on. But James Gunn had been hyping up episode 4. Whenever he was asked what his favorite episode of the series was, he said episode 4, which was the Weasel episode. And I was like, okay, James Gunn loves a character like Weasel and how weird and insane this character is and whatnot, but he loves these kinds of characters, right? And so I was like, okay, we'll get some backstory with Weasel and whatnot. And guys, so let me just say, before we dive into the specifics and the details of this episode, the first maybe 20% of it, I was like, this is the same. It's all the same. It's all blending together. This whole show is just going to be fine for me, and we're going to move on. Then the next maybe 40 to 50%, not the Weasel backstory to end the episode, but just the Rick Flag stuff and the Cersei stuff. And I was like, oh, and the Frankenstein stuff. Frankenstein in this episode is so funny. Anyways, but I was like, oh, this is actually, well, it's still James Gunn, but it's James Gunn, I think, operating at the peak that I like him at, where it's goofy and it's silly, but it's also driving a story forward and it's got some interesting stuff. And then the last 10% of this episode, 10-15% of this episode was James Gunn at his absolute best, because I'm not kidding. I almost teared up at the end of this episode. And I when the episode ended with the whole Weasel sequence, I just sat there in my chair and I went, how in the world is this possible that James Gunn can make me feel something for this crazy looking Weasel character? So we'll get there. But I took notes as always, and we're going to dive into this episode. This is, though, by far, in my opinion, the best episode of the show. Episode 4, I totally agree with James Gunn. By far, the best episode of the show. Does that mean that the rest of the show is going to be great? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But, I mean, the show so far has been fine, but this episode was just an elevation of everything that came before it. And I think I'm excited now for episode 5. The previous, couple episodes, I was like, entering these episodes, I was like, yeah, it is what it is. We'll see what happens. But I'm genuinely excited to see episode 5. But anyways, we'll get there when we get there. But let's first talk about episode 4. So we start out here, and it's. I mean, I knew going into it that this was the Weasel episode. We actually start out here though with Rick Flag and Princess Ilana, and it seems like they are, in some kind of whirlwind romance or whatever, which is interesting because I was like, where are we going with this? And we find out later on in the episode why this is important to this storyline. I think that's going to be an interesting conundrum for Rick Flag here as well. Economos is also back. John Economos, played by Steve Agee. He was from Peacemaker and Suicide Squad, so like him, he's a fun character. A lot of references to Peacemaker. His leg is he's still using that crutch, and so that was obviously a direct reference to Peacemaker. He also said he was fighting an alien invasion, which obviously was Peacemaker. So it is an interesting thing to see those connections still being made from the DCEU into the DCU. It's also interesting how this seems like this is the end of the first mission of the Creature Commandos, because they're all coming back, and then by the time this episode ends, they all get sent back out to, is it Kolistan? I don't remember the names of these places, but the other country where the princess is. And then also Frankenstein's monster, I guess. I'm going to call him Frankenstein because I know Dr. Frankenstein. But, Frankenstein is spying on them. And it's funny because he's jealous over Rick Flag, which I don't know. I think it's kind of silly. I thought at the beginning of this episode it was a little too silly. But by the time they have their conversation at Rick Flag's house, I was like, that's really funny. Makes total sense here. So anyways, we have now a lawyer representing the Weasel. Very interesting. I don't know where that came from, but sure. And then we get this interrogation scene between Waller and Cersei. And look, I like Waller enough. I think we're at the point, though, where, I've seen Amanda Waller just be Amanda Waller for the longest time and just do Amanda Waller things that I'd almost like to see this Waller show that James Gunn talked about, because I'd like to dig into her as a character, see kind of what makes her tick and why she does the things that she does, because I feel like it's just the same. It's just Viola Davis being Amanda Waller. I almost liked seeing a little bit more vulnerability from this character who just is so hardened at this point, because I was like, oh, that's something different, something interesting about this character when she's shown the vision from Cersei. But yeah, Cersei does that whole thing where she's like, I'm going to save the world by killing the princess because the princess is going to destroy the world. And she shows the vision. I guess we'll skip ahead to the vision a little bit because it's a very interesting vision, for all the people out there who are saying in the comments down below, well, I think the DCU is going to be very separate and whatnot. Totally fine, totally fair. I'm sure that it's going to be more separate than maybe something like the MCU. But we're starting out with Justice League visions already. Superman and Wonder Woman are out there. Peacemaker is there. Like, we're starting out with Justice League visions already. So, I don't know. I don't know how disconnected it's going to be when you're starting out your entire DCU with that and you have Superman coming up. And it is the DCU Superman. You see the cape with the yellow Superman logo. So, yeah, we'll see. It's interesting. And later on, I guess we get the revelation that these, she can't make these visions up. The word that they use, though, is genuine. These visions have to be genuine, not that they have to be true. So we'll see what that means, whether or not this actually has to come to pass, or whether that means that Cersei just genuinely believes this is going to happen, or I don't know. I find it hard to believe that we are destined to head to this point in time, because that is a very bleak future, but we'll see where James Gunn decides to go from there. So we get a little bit more of this Weasel backstory interspersed at the beginning, and then we go full into it at the end. And, at the beginning, I was kind of like, man, it's really hard to feel bad for Weasel when he's just acting like, just crazy when he's with the lawyer and he's eating pictures and stuff like that. But later on, I don't know how James Gunn did it. I don't know how James Gunn did it. So we'll get there when we get there. But we get the future vision, like we talked about. And, it's funny. I wrote down in my notes, the future vision is kind of, it's where you need a YouTube channel like New Rockstars just for this exact kind of scene. Just break it down frame by frame. I'm excited to watch those videos and see what they dig up from there. At this point in the episode, though, we're about halfway through, and I'm like, yeah, I think this is the best episode so far. It's getting a better sense of the story, sprinkling in the Weasel backstory, and I think it's really interesting as well. So then we get this doctor woman Dr. McPherson, who is explaining, she's a scholar in Themyscira apparently, and she's explaining what Circe's powers are. She's some kind of prophet who predicted that there was going to be some kind of storm on Themyscira, and then nobody really believed her, but some people did. And I guess, yeah, this is the whole thing about these, this dream is going to be genuine. And so Waller says, okay, go after the princess. And that is where the conundrum here comes with Rick Flag, because now I think it's interesting, right? What is Rick Flag going to do? Is he going to go rogue? We'll see. We'll have to see. We get a scene here in the cafeteria now where the creature commandos are starting to come together a little bit. Bride is she murdered somebody, to protect Nina Mazursky. So that's something, I guess. And then we get a really fun scene where Frankenstein fights Flag, and that's fun in itself. But by the way, I love David Harbour as Frankenstein. I feel like that he's instantly my favorite character after this episode, because his whole conversation with Rick Flag about Titanic and When Harry Met Sally was so funny. But it's not just funny for the sake of being funny. It's telling us what Frankenstein, is thinking about. He's so sad and naive, and the conversation between them it's kind of wholesome in a very strange sense, because he's so naive and so funny. Like he's like, we're best friends now, right? And I don't know. There's something so funny about it, and so heartwarming in a weird. It's so strange. I don't even know how to describe it, but I think Frankenstein was one of my favorite parts of this episode. But then we get the Weasel flashback, and I didn't even write anything down, because I just sat there and took it all in. And we get to that last scene there where Weasel is trying to drag that girl out and she dies in front of him. I felt that, and I can't believe it. I don't know how James Gunn is able to do that kind of stuff with a character that looks that insane like Weasel and acts that insane. But I mean, I felt that, I felt more for this character than I have for any other member of this Creature Commandos crew. And that's saying something. Because look, he employed that same formula with Bride of Frankenstein and with G.I. Robot in the past 2 episodes. And even then I was like, interesting, I guess, but I didn't really feel anything. And so when we started out this episode, I was like, oh, I mean, it's just going to be the same with the Weasel. He's just going to try to make us feel bad for the Weasel. And after this episode ended, I just sat there and I was like, I don't know how he does it. So again, I mean, doesn't take away from the fact, as we wrap up my thoughts here, that I think the first 3 episodes are a little bit choppy still. Not my favorite thing, but episode 4 is the potential of this show. And I just think if the rest of the show is anything close to it, then we are in for a wild ride. So I'm excited now. I really, this is my favorite episode of the show, and I'm excited to see where we go from here. But guys, let me know in the comments down below. Did you enjoy episode 4 of Creature Commandos? Is this your favorite? Least favorite? What do you think about this episode? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty, guys, let's talk about episode 4 of one of my favorite shows of 2024 thus far, Skeleton Crew. I know it's early to be saying that. I think we're only about halfway through the show. Is there 8 episodes, 7 episodes? Anyways, we still have a long way to go. But man, oh man, do I love this show. So anyways, I've been stalling for a little bit. This is a full spoiler discussion for Skeleton Crew episode 4. If you have not seen episode 4, no worries at all. Just make sure to save this podcast segment or video, whatever, medium you're watching this part on. And just save it for later and then come back to it once you have. Let's talk about Skeleton Crew episode 4, full spoiler discussion. Guys, I've said this before in my previous Skeleton Crew spoiler discussions, but this show is doing something for me that really no other Star Wars or even very few Marvel shows have done for me, is get me super invested in the characters. Now, for those of you who have been watching the channel, you guys might know what my favorite show of all time is. It's Friends. And yes, I know, not every single episode of Friends, not even every single season of Friends is amazing, because, I mean, it just dips in quality sometimes. Like, it really peaked in seasons 4 and 5-ish, and 3, 4, 5-ish, and then it started to go downhill. But the reason it still is holistically my favorite show really doesn't have anything to do with a decline in quality. It's the characters. These are people that I became attached to. These are the characters that made the show go, so far that I could watch almost anything they do just to spend 22 minutes with them every episode, right? That's what keeps you going. That's why sitcoms are so successful. And look, it's totally great if you can write a great miniseries or a great limited series or a really great narrative plot-driven series like, I don't know, like The Penguin. I talked about this in my immediate reaction where, yes, I mean, I'm not emotionally attached to any of the characters in that show. Maybe Vic, but even Vic, I was like, oh, Vic, come on, when he made his turn. But yeah, I'm not emotionally, attached to any of those characters. But I mean, it's such a great show because of the intrigue and the drive. But again, there's, it's not a show that I'm going to rewatch because, I want to spend more time with Oz. I'm just more fascinated by what he's going to do next, right? But on the flip side, sitcoms and now Skeleton Crew are examples of shows where I watch because, yes, the stories are interesting, and I think the plots and the drama and the emotion is also interesting. And Skeleton Crew, the action's fun, and it's a Star Wars show that has an interesting mystery at the center. But it's the characters, guys. What this show did so well. Look, I like Din Djarin for what it's worth. I think he's interesting. I think Ahsoka in the live action show is fine, just not super attached to her as a character there. I think no one in the Acolyte particularly stood out, or I think. I like Cassian, but I think it's less of, I'm finding myself emotionally attached to him, and just more, I think it's interesting what he's up to. But this show, Wim, Fern, KB, and of course our beloved Neil, and even Jod a little bit. Jod is he's kind of warming up to me. I'm sure there will be some kind of second act or third act twist where he betrays them at some point and then comes back to rescue them. Like I'm sure that's coming because that just happens in these kinds of shows. But these characters are awesome. The kids are cast fantastically. And so because of that, episodes 1 and 2, loved. Episode 3, loved. And Owl aside, loved. But we head into episode 4, and the question that will really dog me, for every single one of these episodes is, can the show continue to keep up the momentum? Because I don't know. It almost feels too good to be true that, you watch these shows and you're so used to Star Wars shows ending so poorly that you're like, I don't know. Can it keep going? And look, I don't know how it's going to end, but episode 4, I really liked. And I will say this, and we'll dive into the details of the episode in just a second here, but just to kind of give some more overall thoughts, I will say episode 4 was a little bit fillerish in a weird way. And you guys know, if you've been watching the channel for a while, I'm not a big fan of these, filler concepts, right? In The Mandalorian, I feel like just the story and the concepts of these episodes, rather, it's just not for me a lot of the time because there's, very little attention paid to the overarching story in some of the episodes. My mind goes to the Frog Egg episode, or it goes to the episode where it's not even in The Mandalorian, it's like Book of Boba Fett, where he goes to Tatooine and sees Amy Sedaris' character, and she's like, you gotta go find me this part, come back and get me the part, and you can get your ship. It feels very video game-esque, side questing. Also the Jack Black episode, it all feels very kind of side questing, sometimes. But this episode, again, it kind of fits that mold. And any other show where I'm not attached to these characters, I would have been very annoyed with it, honestly. But these characters, I can just watch do anything. And on top of that, it's not just like the entire episode is a side quest, because there's still enough there where you're like, okay, interesting. Like at Atten, you're still getting hints of it. So we're on at Akron, not at Atten. And at the end of the show, obviously, with the whole SM-33 bit where he turns bad, and apparently he was on this planet before. I think that's setting up another really interesting mystery of who the old captain was. I'm sure that he'll probably end up being the villain of the show. I wonder who he is. Maybe he's dead. We never know. Maybe Jude Law, is the villain. We never know. Or we will find out, rather. But we don't know right now. So anyways, I think that, this episode, while yes, it was a little bit of a diversion, I care too much about these characters at this point that it makes me happy just to see them and to spend time with them. So, and also all the things that, the series has been doing well so far, this episode rather continues to do well. Like the music, which is still delightful even from the beginning. I love the music, the visuals, the tone. Some of the dialogue, a little cringy, a little on the nose, but they're kids, and I don't know, it's just something about the kids. You just kind of go, but they're kids, right? Like, I know Neil's whole speech about why can't everyone just be friends would have come off as so cringy and so cheesy in any other world. But in this one, when Neil's the one saying it, I'm like, I'm on board, Neil. You keep going, you keep talking, and let's all be friends here. So now let's actually dive into the episode itself. Took some notes here, and then we'll talk about it more on the other side. So first of all, we start out in space here, and they're heading to a planet that we think is at Atten. But of course, as we were starting out the episode, I was like, no way. There is no way it's at Atten. There's no way that they're back home already. And sure enough, this planet is not at Atten. And is it another Old Republic planet? Maybe? Well, the answer is probably yes, because it's at Akron. And turns out at the end of the episode, we find out in that tower that there are a bunch of Old Republic planets. And maybe they're Old Republic planets, but, planets in the same system, right? And Atten is somewhere in this system as well. I wonder if the rest of the series is just going to be them going to these different planets and just trying to find Atten. I don't know. I don't know how coordinates work in Star Wars if you can just do that, like walking around a neighborhood. Is it like walking around a neighborhood or walking around a city? I have no idea, honestly. But anyways, they run into these kids who are called part of this, I guess, group or clan called Troik. And I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of odd. The whole just the mannerisms and the way that this group was operating and the way that they were acting is like kind of odd. But you just kind of go with it. And they're fighting these soldiers that we don't really get a whole lot about. I'd be more interested, honestly, if this episode were a little longer to get some more lore about who these soldiers are and what the war is that they're fighting, because we don't really get a whole lot of that in this episode, which I guess in hindsight is not the point, because I was, at the beginning I was asking like, who are these guys? But I guess it doesn't really matter, because then they're rescued and they're taken to this place with a guy named General Strix. Again, these characters, other than the daughter, whose name starts with an H and it's escaping me, Hayna, I think that's her name. The one who Neil talks to a lot, which is so cute, by the way. Anyways, but I mean, the characters themselves, I guess, are not super important. It's just more of the adventure that they're going on and all that stuff. So, in any other show, I would have been complaining about this being filler, all this kind of stuff, like going on a side quest and going to meet these people or whatever. But I love these kids, and I don't know. I feel like the leash is so much longer. I said this in my immediate reaction for this show, because I could just watch these kids do anything. Now, if you keep just filler episode after filler episode, then I'm going to be a little annoyed. But I think that we are still continuing to drive the story forward in a sense, and I think that's good enough for me. I'll watch them adventure anyways. Neil giving his food to the kids, Neil talking to, I'm going to call her Hayna. I don't know if that's her name. But Neil's walking with Hayna and he's giving his food to the kids, and that's so cute. And Neil is just so pure-hearted. He's so beautifully optimistic. He's talking about the fact that on Aden, these buildings are schools and there's peace and everyone is working for the great work, which again, a little bit of indoctrination going on there, a little bit of propaganda, right? We'll see. I have more thoughts about that as we get to the supervisor's tower, or the tower that represents the supervisor's tower on Akron. But anyways, he's so beautifully optimistic and naive, and I love that about him. And I think that Hayna recognizes that from him as well throughout this episode. And, I wrote this in my notes, and I kind of mean this half jokingly, but I also just mean this genuinely. The episode is just winning by Neil, and Neil alone. I think otherwise I'd be a little bit bored. I'd be like, yeah, okay. Like I was just imagining as I was watching this episode, what if these were adults and just, the same things were going on? And I was like, yeah, I'd be a bit bored, honestly. But I mean, it's Neil, and it's these kids rather. And I think that that's just awesome. And so kids are training a little bit, and then they're forced to go out there and fight and represent the group, because I guess that's part of the deal. And they go out into the fog, and Neil is scared, and just so cute. So cute. And Hayna decides to go with them. And of course it was Jod who comes back through the fog. I knew it was Jod, just because you're not setting up all this drama just to have these kids fight actual people. I just didn't think so. I knew it was Jod. Because also we didn't, Jod just kind of disappeared. Now, what was interesting was because of, the fact that they cut away from him when he was surrounded by the soldiers as he was talking to SM-33, and then they cut away from them, I actually was wondering, okay, so are they, again, hinting at the fact that Jedi, maybe he used force powers to get away from it, and they don't want to reveal exactly what happened there just yet. But it turns out there's a very simple explanation for it, and he just used the credits to buy these animals for the Detroit people. And again, I think maybe that's telling in itself, the force powers, are they ever going to come back? Are we ever going to explore the fact that he claims he's a Jedi? I don't know. We'll see. We'll have to see about that. But I think it's very, very interesting. I think it's very, very interesting. And then they go, so that's like, 80% of the episode. And then this is the part where the show actually picks up its, A storyline, which is getting home to Aden and what's going on in Aden with the treasure and whatnot. And so they head to this tower, the supervisor's tower, or what would have been the supervisor's tower, on Aden anyways, which I still think this whole supervisor thing, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised, I was thinking about this. I wouldn't be surprised if the supervisor, whoever he, she, they are, is not the captain, the old captain, and they just kind of ended up on Aden and is hiding out somewhere. Maybe. We'll have to see it, because we haven't seen the supervisor yet, I don't think, and we also haven't seen this old captain yet, and this old captain was after some kind of treasure on Aden, so I think a lot of mysteries still to be revealed. What is the great work and all this kind of stuff, but these aren't mysteries where you're kind of like, oh, I'm so frustrated that I don't know the answers. These are mysteries that you're like, I can't wait to find out what happens and how they're going to be tying into the story later on. I think that's such a great thing. Guys, this show, I can't believe how much I love the show. It's something intangible, some intangible quality about this show that I can't quite explain compared to other Star Wars shows. But as long as it continues this trajectory vaguely in quality, this is going to easily be my favorite Star Wars show. It's not even close. But again, don't, try not to get too ahead of myself, because it could all go downhill from here. By the way, forgot to mention the Daniels, who directed Everything Everywhere All at Once, directed this episode. I am I posted a review of Everything Ever All at Once. I don't know if I'll probably watch it again at some point. I don't know if I was in the wrong state of mind or whatever, because everyone loved that movie, and I thought, it's fine. It's okay. And maybe I'm just crazy. But their direction is obviously very different and very assertive, and they fit right into the Star Wars universe. They had some very fun shots, though, at the end of this episode, especially with SM-33, the kind of point of view shots, right? The kind of horror movie shots where he's the camera is basically right in front of him, and his head is moving around and all that kind of stuff. I think that's also interesting. And I think that, they made their stamp on this episode, but they also fit right into the Star Wars universe. So they find the coordinates, and the coordinates are gone, and SM3 was the one who took them out. And we get this revelation that Fern first of all has this kind of moment where she's doubting herself, and I think it's sad, but it's kind of like, oh yeah, you understand why she got so mad. Again, dialogue a little bit on the nose, but it is what it is. It is what it is. And then so she realizes that he was instructed by the old captain to not talk anything or say anything about Adin, and then she does an override, and then we get the horror version of SM-33, and that it's really scary actually, and the camera work well done, really well done. And I love the POV shots because they're just super interesting to me. Very different from what we're used to from Star Wars. And but side note, by the way, as I'm remembering now that because as Jod is getting ready to protect the kids, he I think it's so interesting how the kids are beginning to quote unquote imprint on him, because right after he rescues them later on from the Troiks, they Neil and Wim give him a hug, and I think that's interesting. I wonder. I'd be so curious to get more information about his character soon and sort of reveal like where he came from, and is he a hardened criminal, but then maybe is he starting to soften? It's a very, it's a Mandalorian kind of Yoda Mandalorian kind of trope, but I think even more so here because we get to actually see his face. And Jude Law, by the way, is awesome. Jude Law is so great in the show, and I love it. And then, the show ends with Neil fainting. It's, it's my least favorite episode of the 4, but I really liked it, and again, it's the kids. I just can't wait to spend another week, for the next few weeks with these kids and with Jude Law, and seeing where this adventure goes. This show has again done something that no other Star Wars show has been able to do thus far, and I've just been so impressed by it. So guys, that was my spoiler discussion for episode 4 of Skeleton Crew. Let me know what you thought about this episode in the comments down below. Are you enjoying the show, or maybe you're not enjoying the show? Let me know either way in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts there. And are you excited for the next episode? Let me know in the comments. Alrighty guys, so we have some interesting updates now to Avengers Doomsday that we got to talk about here, and I'm going to actually split it up into 2 parts because I think there was one main focus of this article that came out, I think from Deadline, or it could be Hollywood Reporter, anyways, but there's confirmed by the major trades, but there's one big piece of news that they wanted to talk about, which I think is interesting, and I think has some implications. We'll talk about it here in this segment, which is Hayley Atwell coming back for Avengers Doomsday, but there was also another little hidden nugget in there that we'll talk about in the next segment, which I think is also interesting. I'm not going to say exciting necessarily just because I don't know what to make of it, but we'll talk about that in just a second. So let's get on to the news first that Hayley Atwell is reportedly coming back to the MCU in Avengers Doomsday. Now, this, in terms of being surprising or being any kind of secret or whatnot, I don't think that this is surprising at all, to be quite honest with you. I think that just the fact that she came back in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, she voices Peggy Carter all the time in What If, in 3 seasons of What If, right? I think she's very game to return to the MCU in some capacity. And I think that that's a great thing because I personally am a big fan of the Peggy character. I think that, I again have to admit I still haven't seen not Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but Agent Carter. I also have not seen Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but I haven't seen Agent Carter yet, and I know it's really great, so I have to get around to doing that. But I think in the MCU proper, at least, I've really enjoyed her character. And I think that it was such a great ending for her and Steve to have, not just for Steve, but for both of them, because they're both, lost a lot, and they both fought hard for just their ideals and their, what they believed in. I think that that's really a great thing for the character. She's a very strong and very smart character as well. And so I think that, it's just great to have a character like Peggy come back to the MCU. Now, the big question is that was not confirmed, just like we talked about with the Chris Evans news coming back for Avengers Doomsday. And I think it's interesting that these 2 things are being paired together because in the article it indicates that this was sort of not in addition, but paired with the fact that Chris Evans was coming back. So these 2 things are not unrelated. Now, how they're related, whether or not these 2 characters are going to be together in the movie or if they're just, it's just the actors were talking to one another and they came back at the same time. I don't know. But the article seems to indicate that there is some relation between Chris Evans coming back and Hayley Atwell coming back into Avengers Doomsday. which is interesting because the question becomes, who is she playing? Is she playing a multiversal variant of, Captain Carter, right, from What If? Because the one in Earth 838 is dead, obviously. Is she playing? Yeah, she could be playing a Captain Carter, though, in another universe, right? We saw another version of Maria Rambeau, right? Monica Rambeau's mom, but she was the superhero version of herself. I forget the name. Binary? Is it Binary? Anyways, at the end of the Marvels, we saw her in that X-Men universe with Beast, right? So could Hayley Atwell be playing a version of Peggy Carter from that universe? Or, an interesting one, could they be finally retconning and explaining what happened at the end of Avengers Endgame? This is my personal, well, not theory, but just what my mind gravitated towards immediately when I heard the news that she was coming back, as well as Chris Evans was coming back, is that somehow these two don't get their quote-unquote, good ending, right, at the end of Avengers Endgame. I think that I wouldn't love this, honestly, but I don't love many of the options to get them into this movie either, because if they're just multiversal variants, then fine. I mean, it is what it is. I don't know why we're doing it other than just for kind of stunt casting, to be honest, because I think the whole Robert Downey Jr. thing, is interesting because it's not like, oh, let's just have a version of Iron Man come back. That's what I really was not super excited for. When they announced he was going to be playing Doctor Doom, I was way more excited because I was like, there's infinite potential here to tell an interesting story with the face of Iron Man being on the big villain of these two Avengers films. I think that's super interesting. If it's just a random Captain America and a random Peggy Carter plucked from another universe, I don't know if I'd be that excited for it, honestly. I think what made Johnny Storm so fun was just that they knew what they had. It was a quick sort of not cameo, but small role. And, Chris Evans was just there to kind of be funny and then, make the audience cheer, and then he was gone. It wasn't meant to be a sustained role in that film at all. And I think that it worked perfectly for that. But it seems like Chris Evans is going to have some kind of sustained role in this film. And it seems like Hayley Atwell will as well. Because, I mean, if you notice, right, these big castings that come out pretty early on, because Avengers Doomsday, rather, has not even, I don't think the script is finished yet. I mean, it could be, for all we know, but the last time we got an update, the script wasn't finished. And production is not going to begin until early next year. So the film hasn't started filming, and they're just starting to finalize the cast list and, get everything ready to go for next year. So it remains to be seen, right, how much of a role that she has. I would guess it's something related to the Sacred Timeline. I just find it hard to believe that they, especially for Avengers Doomsday, which I'm presuming they're going to have a bigger role in than she had in Multiverse of Madness and Chris Evans had in Deadpool and Wolverine. I think it's going to be a bigger role. The question is just how and what. There are rumors going around right now that Chris Evans is going to be playing Nomad. That hasn't been confirmed as of the recording of this segment, so we'll see. We will see, but I'd be very curious and want to see how they fit into the story and whether or not they're going to be featured in the marketing and how that's all going to work. So we'll see. We'll see, because it's shaping up to be sort of the, not really the wrap up to the multiverse saga. I think in concept for sure, the multiverse saga, but really more a wrap up of, again, another wrap up of just everything in MCU history. So I think that'll be interesting. It's always great to have her back, though, I think, and I'd be very curious to see what kind of role she has. Maybe she'll be more of the Captain Carter version, and maybe she'll even fight, Chris Evans's character. I don't even know. Maybe he'll just be Johnny Storm, and this is all a nothing burger. But we'll see. We'll see where that goes. So that's the news about Hayley Atwell, and like I said, we'll talk about the other news relating to Chris Evans in just a second. But guys, what do you think about Hayley Atwell returning to the MCU as Captain Carter, Peggy Carter, some other entirely different character? That would be interesting. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of this news. All right, so I said I would talk about the other piece of news, and it was a kind of sneaky bit of news that came out of this Hayley Atwell article, and that is that apparently Marvel wanted to do a solo film with Chris Evans before Doomsday. So, and it's a very small sentence, but I think the implications of this are so interesting and so big that I think it deserves its own little segment here to talk about it, because Chris Evans apparently was set to return before Avengers Doomsday, and this is not including Deadpool and Wolverine. Maybe this is why he was in Deadpool and Wolverine, because he was like, well, I'm not really doing anything with Marvel right now, but I'd like to be, so let's just make this happen with Deadpool and Wolverine. Who knows? But apparently, Chris Evans was set to have another solo film before Avengers Doomsday, and then, it would lead into his appearance in Doomsday. And that's it. That's really all we know. But again, the implications here are so big. So first of all, this means that a solo project with Chris Evans was in the work for a long time, because, I mean, just with the production, right, how long a production go from pre-production to, conceptualization to the finished product is years, right? So just the fact that they were throwing this idea around, and apparently it had, was gaining some steam, because the article says that the only reason this didn't happen was because a story was not nailed down. So this means it was almost immediately after Endgame, I'd have to imagine. Probably after COVID, right? After the main waves of COVID, like in 2021 or 2022, they probably had some sort of idea, because then, if they had an idea at that point, then the film wouldn't even have come out until 2024 or so. And that's interesting because, originally these Avengers films were supposed to come out in 2025 and 2026. Or actually, originally, both Avengers films were supposed to come out in 2025, which is crazy that it was even a concept. And then, 2025, 2026, and now 26 and 27. So there is that. But yeah, I mean, I would suspect then that this means this idea was being thrown out almost immediately after Phase 4 kicked off. And that's interesting because, Chris Evans had said, oh, I love this character. I'd be very protective of him and all that sort of stuff. And it's totally his right to say that. And I actually agree with him. I think be protective of your character. Be protective of his legacy. Honestly, if Robert Downey Jr. only came back to play a variant of Iron Man, like we talked about before with the Hayley Atwell news, and he just did it to get a paycheck, I would be disappointed, honestly, because his character had such a beautiful ending in Avengers Endgame. So there's that. But I guess Chris Evans, first of all, wanted to come back to the MCU much quicker than we originally had thought, right? I mean, it's not like a Deadpool and Wolverine. This is a solo film that he's committing to, as well as Avengers Doomsday. Or I guess, I wonder if it was Avengers Kang Dynasty that he was going to be in at the beginning. I don't know. Because apparently, I saw a rumor, and again, I don't even know where it came from, so just take this with a grain of salt. Take this with a massive grain of salt. But I saw a rumor somewhere that was like, originally the plot of Kang Dynasty was the Avengers, fighting evil Avengers or something like that. I don't know. I don't even know if that's true. But maybe that was the case, and maybe that's what Chris Evans was returning for. But, it's interesting because he talks about, also, I think it talks about the fact that Hayley Atwell is going to be a part of this solo project. So it's interesting because I don't know what this solo project even was, because I'm sure they were developing Captain America 4. They obviously had developed Falcon and the Winter Soldier, probably while they were doing Endgame and Infinity War, they were developing Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So they knew they were going to have another Captain America. But then to have Chris Evans come back, and it's interesting because every single time this story is brought up, they never mention the name Captain America. It's always just a project. Chris Evans, Hayley Atwell, but they're never saying Captain America, because I think they want to be protective of the fact that Sam Wilson is now the Sacred Timeline's Captain America. And I think that it would cheapen it, if another variant of Steve Rogers just showed up out of the multiverse and whatnot. But who knows? I mean, there are rumors that he was playing, he's going to be playing Nomad in Avengers Doomsday, and maybe this was a solo Nomad film. I don't know why you would do this. I think that there are so many other films you could and maybe should be doing. I'm going to keep saying this until my voice goes hoarse, but where is Shang-Chi 2? I mean, why couldn't we have been doing a Shang-Chi 2? Anyways, but I think it's interesting that they were planning on doing this. Now, the question then becomes for me, is this still in the works? Because apparently this was, the only reason this didn't happen was because a story did not get nailed down. But what if? Well, so let's just say, for example, Chris Evans is playing a very different version of Steve Rogers. Like, he's just playing a Nomad version of Steve Rogers, and he's not going to be Captain America. He's not going to conflict with Sam Wilson in that way. It's a variant, whatever. Like, whatever. It's not Captain America. Is there still a plan to have a solo Chris Evans film post Secret Wars? Is that still in the plans? I don't know if the fact that it now takes place after Secret Wars has changed that, because maybe, the story wasn't nailed down to begin with, and now the story, can be changed and they can make it work. Is there a willingness from Chris Evans' part to do this? Is he committing to being a part of the next saga of the MCU, the Mutant Saga? Maybe he takes a break a little bit from the Multiverse Saga, and then he comes back for Deadpool and Wolverine, and he comes back for Doomsday and Secret Wars, but, maybe he's just taking a little bit of a break, and then he wants to come back full-time in the Mutant Saga? I don't know. I honestly don't know. Maybe he's playing a mutant. I don't know. But I think all this is interesting because it seems like all these things, right? We kind of had assumed that Avengers, Doomsday, and Secret Wars would be pretty full of, I'm not going to say cameos, but recurring legacy characters, right? I would assume, honestly, I would be shocked if all 6 of the legacy actors who played the original 6 Avengers didn't show up. I don't know if they're going to be playing their original characters. Like, I think Black Widow is very dead in the Sacred Timeline. Obviously can be brought back in a different variety of different ways. Gamora was brought back, right? I think Chris Evans is coming back, Robert Downey Jr. is coming back, and then I'm sure Jeremy Renner, in whatever capacity he's physically capable of, obviously after his horrific accident, but he looks like he's doing great at this point. So whatever capacity he's able to do, maybe even just as a mentor figure to some of these younger Avengers, fine. Right? I'm sure Mark Ruffalo's coming back. He comes back in anything that they ask him to do, which I think is great. I don't think that that's a bad thing. And I'm sure Chris Hemsworth is going to come back because I'm sure he wants redemption from Thor: Love and Thunder. He's talked publicly. This isn't just me saying this as someone who doesn't like Thor: Love and Thunder. He's talked publicly about the fact that he wants another shot at it. So I'm sure all 6 legacy actors will be back, including probably Nick Fury after Secret Invasion. Who even knows what happened to him after that and the Marvels? But yeah, I think it's interesting now to think about the fact that in a post-Secret Wars world, we could still be seeing Chris Evans be a pretty major part of Marvel going forward. And does that have to do with his relative quiet, career after Endgame, a lack of success? I know he did a movie called The Gray Man, he's doing Red One, but I don't think he's really done a movie that, was super. I guess Knives Out counts. Like, Knives Out was, I think, right after Avengers Endgame, and I loved Knives Out. But, like the real post-Endgame career, maybe it just hasn't taken off in the same way that he'd have likened it to, and maybe he's just willing to come back to Marvel. I don't know. Guys, you'll have to let me know in the comments down below. What do you think about the news that Chris Evans was apparently going to get a solo film before Doomsday, and do you think it's still going to happen? I think that's the big question. Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty, guys, there have been a lot of movies coming out in December, and I haven't had the chance to talk about all of them, unfortunately, just limited time, but I was able to check out one of the latest films to come out here from Disney, and that is Mufasa: The Lion King, the live-action, quote-unquote, really animated prequel film to the 2019, again, quote-unquote, live-action animated, really, remake, rather, not adaptation, but remake of the original classic in the 90s, The Lion King. And so this is the prequel directed by Barry Jenkins, who, if you recall, is the director of the Best Picture winning Moonlight, the correct Best Picture winning Moonlight over La La Land. And yeah, Barry Jenkins is directing this, and it's a prequel about Mufasa and how he, became the Lion King. And, not to spoil this, because we are going to be doing a non-spoiler and then a spoiler discussion. So if you have not seen the film, no worries. We are going to start out here with a non-spoiler discussion, and then I will clearly delineate when these spoilers will begin, and we'll go from there. So guys, if you haven't seen The Lion King, no worries, and then I'll let you know when the spoilers begin. So let's talk about Mufasa: The Lion King. First of all, as I always like to do with my reviews, just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from, because I always believe that when you're listening to a review, the most important thing is not really the prestige or the accolades of the reviewer necessarily, although, if you're listening to a very well-renowned reviewer, that's always a good thing. But I always think it's a good thing to hear where the reviewer is coming from, because I think that the most important thing you can do when listening to a review is know, okay, maybe I align with the reviewer and my tastes and whatnot, and I understand where this person is coming from, so then I can align where I'm probably going to be coming from to decide whether I want to see this movie or show. Anyways, that's why I give context, because I think it's important. So, the 2019 version of Lion King, saw it in theaters. And first of all, I always say this because it's true. I didn't grow up a Disney animation kid. I grew up a Pixar kid. So I'm sure I watched almost all of the classic Disney animation films: Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Mulan, Pocahontas, Snow White, Cinderella. I'm sure I watched all of them, right? But I didn't have those formative, nostalgic memories of those films like some of my other friends did who grew up around that time. Instead, I have those nostalgic, formative memories for films like Finding Nemo and Toy Story and Monsters Inc. and Ratatouille, etc. So those are kind of my films. So I went into 2019's The Lion King, just curious, because again, I love The Lion King. It's a great movie. Just didn't have that nostalgia for it, but wanted to see how they were able to pull it off, especially because I loved 2016's The Jungle Book, the remake of The Jungle Book. That's an animated movie I had zero nostalgia for. I had seen it maybe once and didn't really like it that much, but I came out of 2016's The Jungle Book, directed by Jon Favreau as well. I loved it. I was so impressed at how they were able to take this story and bring it to life, quote unquote, even though, yes, it's almost all animated except for the character of Mowgli, right? And I thought, okay, if Jon Favreau is going to do Lion King and he's going to make it in the same style, I'm so on board. I came out of that movie, I remember this, and I said, it's good. Because honestly, if you're remaking one of the best animated, stories of all time, how much worse could it possibly be? And I say that facetiously. I'm sure that they could have made a very bad movie just following the exact same steps of the animated film. But in all honesty, right? If you're following that same exact story, and they pretty much did, I don't think they deviated from it almost at all. Some of the other live-action remakes deviate a little bit here and there, some more than others, but Lion King, no. Lion King was basically just following the exact same steps in the animated film. And I said, look, how much worse could it be? So it's good. But there was something that felt a little off, right? It felt almost a little lifeless. And I don't know what it is about Jungle Book, and honestly, I could not give you a technical answer. I could not give you a film critic or film reviewer or film pundit answer. I just somehow the animation of the animals in the Jungle Book look more real. And real, by real, I mean just look more believable is what I should say. The animation, it's almost paradoxical, but the animation in The Lion King, 2019's The Lion King, was almost too photorealistic that I just could not get on board with the characters and what they were doing. It was almost easier to close your eyes and listen to the characters talking, and you can almost imagine the animated version of The Lion King with just different voices, and you're like, oh yeah, that's what's going on. You open your eyes and you're like, what am I watching? You know? But again, not bad. I enjoyed the movie. I enjoyed my experience. It just felt kind of empty, you know? And so I went into this film. This is now 2024, Mufasa the Lion King. First of all, one would assume that a director like Barry Jenkins, is going to jump on projects that he really wants to do. I mean, he is the director of one of the more recent Best Picture winners, right? So you would think you'd be excited because it's Barry Jenkins. And then on top of that, the story looks good. Lin-Manuel Miranda is doing the music. He did this music instead of Moana 2. That's exciting. So I went into this with some cautious optimism, especially given some of the more positive reviews that this film had gotten. Although by the time I had, sat in my chair, the film had landed at about a 60% on Rotten Tomatoes. And so I was like, okay, we'll see. And here's what I will say about Mufasa the Lion King. However you feel about 2019's The live-action Lion King, I don't think, I would be willing to bet that for 95% of people who go into Mufasa the Lion King, having seen 2019's The Lion King, I don't think the range of how you feel about this movie is going to deviate, and by this movie I mean Mufasa the Lion King, how you feel about Mufasa is going to deviate too much from how you felt about 2019's The Lion King. That's my experience as well. I think this movie is good. I think it's all right, is what I would say. And there are a few things here. First of all, the same issue that I had with the CGI of the 2019 Lion King is still here. I feel like this would be a better movie if I just kind of closed my eyes and pretended I was watching an animated movie instead and just listening to the characters talk. Because when you open your eyes, there is just some kind of disconnect going on in terms of my brain. And perhaps it's different for you. And if it is, that's awesome. And you probably really liked the 2019 Lion King, and I liked it more than me. And you probably will like Mufasa the Lion King a little bit more than I will as well. That's great. But for me, as I'm watching this movie, there's just a bit of a disconnect there for me to be able to relate to the characters. Because I think the story is actually interesting in certain parts, although I will say the first little chunk dragged on a little bit for me, and then it kind of picked up steam as it went along, and there were some things here and there that I was like, oh, that was a little bit of a jump here, and you kind of just have to go with it. I think it's similar for other animated films as well, so I'm not saying it's exclusive to Mufasa the Lion King, but I think, for example, I think that, and again, not going into any spoilers, but I think the story arcs for some of the characters are stronger than others. And I'm not going to say who, and I'm not going to say why, but I think that there are, some, especially one character in particular, I was like, okay, by the end of the film, I get it. I think that there was actually a real, journey that this character went on. A couple other characters, I was like, well, it's cool, because you kind of, and that's the thing with prequels, right? For me, prequels have a ceiling, because prequels, especially prequels that are so close in time to the original. And yes, I know Mufasa is not, not a spoiler. I mean, you can see it in the trailers if you, so I hope this isn't a spoiler. But anyways, the Mufasa in this movie is not, that close to the Mufasa in age in The Lion King. He's much younger. But still, I mean, by close, I mean relatively close, right? Because you're seeing the trajectory from how you get from this young Mufasa to the James Earl Jones Mufasa, right? Rest in peace, by the way. It's really, kind of fitting that this movie came out this year. But anyways, yeah, so it's like you're seeing how close these two things can line up together. And with prequels like that, it's interesting because where a lot of things have to end up. So at a certain point in the movie, you always find yourself going, okay, so how are they going to get there? How are they going to get there? Oh, that thing happened, so that's why that's that thing. Okay. And it feels almost like you're checking boxes off, on a list. And so I think prequels in that sense have a ceiling. Now, that ceiling is not always low. I think that, you can make pretty good prequels, especially in that vein, but it's just kind of hard, right? It's just kind of hard when you're telling a story when every single character, especially. Like, it's a little different maybe with The Hobbit, for example, because you don't know what happens to the dwarves and whatnot, but unless you read The Lord of the Rings and all the other books and stuff like that. But I mean, for this story, it's like it's Mufasa and it's Taka, and Taka, I guess this is a spoiler, kind of. I'm sure you know who Taka is, but just in case you don't, that's a character that also ends up in The Lion King and other characters from The Lion King that you see in the trailer. So, again, it's just you kind of know where you're going. So in that way, prequels have a ceiling, and I think this movie had a ceiling as well. And then on top of that, I think there were some interesting choices made with pacing in terms of the structure of the film. There's one thing that they do with the structure of this film that at the beginning I was like, oh, this is fun. I kind of like this. By the halfway point, I was like getting a little old that you're doing this, and then by the end of the movie I was like, I'm over it. I don't think we needed to do this. I get why in an odd way, but I think we didn't have to do this at all. And so there was that. So I think pacing was a little choppy, but I think the overall story was interesting enough. And like I said, by the time the movie ended, I was like, okay, I can see why some characters were, it would have been interesting to tell this story in a way to kind of show where characters came from, especially with one character in particular. Now, with the voice cast, I think that the voice cast is really solid. The actor, but I think it's Aaron Pierre who plays Mufasa, who is going to be the Jon Stewart of the DCU. Pretty exciting. I think he does a good job as Mufasa. I don't remember the actor's name who plays Taka, but I think he also does. Actually, I think he does a great job. And the other characters, again, not to spoil too many of them, but I think they all do a fine job here. And really, nothing to stand out. The other thing, though, speaking of voices, that I did want to talk about before we transition to spoilers and I give my final thoughts in the non-spoiler review is the music. Now, when you have a movie with Lin-Manuel Miranda, and especially you have a movie with Lin-Manuel Miranda right after he did not do Moana 2, so you're kind of like, okay, he's doing Mufasa the Lion King, and he didn't do Moana 2. Let's see what he's got up his sleeve that he was so excited about. And I'm going to be completely honest, because I love the music in Moana, really like a lot of Lin-Manuel's music, and I think that he's, again, so talented. The music's fine. It's not great, honestly. It's just totally fine in this movie. And maybe I have to listen to the soundtrack a couple more times, but honestly, the music is just fine. And I was a little disappointed by that, because that's kind of the ceiling of this movie. The ceiling of this movie is that, in some parts you're like, oh, cool. And then the rest of it, you're like, yeah, it's fine. Again, towards the beginning, it dragged a little bit. The middle was interesting, and then the ending got a little more interesting. But by the time the movie ended, I was like, huh, okay, I saw that, and I guess I understand certain things now. But at the end of the day, I was like, yeah, I saw Mufasa the Lion King, and I think that's about all I have to say about that. So again, I don't think it's a bad movie, and like I said at the very beginning, I think this is true. However much you liked 2019's The Lion King, rather, that's about like the range of disliking compared to The Lion King and liking it more compared to The Lion King is not going to be that big. I can't imagine it's going to be that big. I think that if you really loved The Lion King, you're probably going to really like this movie, and if you really hated that Lion King, I don't think you're going to like this movie very much either. So those are my non-spoiler thoughts for Mufasa the Lion King, and we're going to transition now into the spoiler section. Just a few things I wanted to touch on here before we head on out. So if you haven't seen Mufasa the Lion King, just make sure to save this segment for later and come back to it once you have. And if you have, or if you just don't care about spoilers, welcome. Let's get into it. So the pacing thing that I wanted to address that I was talking about in the non-spoiler review is the whole switching back to the present timeline with, Donald Glover and Beyonce and young Kiara is the daughter of Simba and Nala. I'm getting all these names mixed up now because I just watched the whole movie with Mufasa and Taka, and now I'm like Simba, Nala, all these names. Anyways, but yes, so we have this present day timeline, and I get it, right? Because I'm sure Barry Jenkins really wanted to end the movie with the whole Mufasa's face in the sky and young Kiara kind of being like, oh, it's the passing of the torch and don't be afraid. But I'm not gonna lie, every time they cut back to them, every single time I was like, okay, can we move on? And the more it went on, the progressively more annoyed I got with that sequence, because it became just such a gag towards the middle part where it was just Pumbaa and Timon just being like, making jokes and just hanging out there. And I was like, okay, but can we get back to the story? Can we get back to the story? And every time they interjected with that, I was like, can we move on? Nothing against Billy Eichner or Seth Rogen. I think that in 2019's Lion King, they were cast great. I thought that they were great. And I liked them a lot as these roles. It just kind of felt like the story was halting every single time. The other thing I wanted to really touch on here is Scar, because I think the arc for Mufasa is good. And, it's a character who is pretty noble, and there's some interesting things they do here about family and about how, bloodlines don't really mean your royalty, and you can be a leader and you can be a ruler. And I think for what it's worth, there's a nice lesson there to be had. I did think they skipped through a lot of that stuff pretty quickly, honestly. I think that a lot of it is like, at the beginning especially, he loses his mother and father, and he just kind of, it feels very quick that happens and all that kind of stuff. But the character of Scar, I think they did a great job with in this movie. There's some almost biblical kind of allegories going on here when, in the middle he kind of turns into a Judas figure and betrays Mufasa to Mads Mikkelsen's lion, who I can't remember his name, but it was Mads Mikkelsen. I didn't remember that Mads Mikkelsen was the villain, but as soon as the lion opened his mouth, I was like, oh, it's Mads Mikkelsen. Anyways, distinctive voice, very distinctive voice. But I think that Scar's character was super interesting, and I loved how the voice actor for Scar, again, apologies, I don't remember his name, but I love how at the beginning, he kind of had this annoying, whiny kid voice, teen voice, was just kind of happy-go-lucky, but also very, I think, scared and frightened at certain points and all that kind of stuff. And then as the inferiority complex grew, that voice morphed into Scar. And I was kind of taken aback. I was like, oh, wow, that this actor was able to do that so well. Because by the end of the movie, that's Scar. That is totally Scar. And I was like, how are we going to get this guy Taka to become Scar? Totally did it. And I love how they were playing off of that whole inferiority complex here, where, Mads Mikkelsen's lion is totally playing into that. And he's all like, okay, I see that Mufasa, this kid who didn't belong into my family and I was supposed to get everything, took everything away from me. And I love how at the end it's like, hey, like he turns into the Scar that we know at the beginning of The Lion King, where it's like, well, I guess I'm just hanging out here, but I despise my brother, I despise Mufasa. And they're not real brothers, but, that's the whole point of the movie is what is a brother, right? And I think that was all done really well. In terms of the Sarabi and, Zazu and Rafiki, it's all fine. Rafiki was cute and whatnot. Again, I think that this movie really was a prime example of, did we need to make this? No, and that's a little disappointing because it's Barry Jenkins who was behind it, and you kind of felt like there should be a reason that Barry Jenkins would want to make a movie like this, and I'm sure he has a great reason for it. I just don't know it, because at the end of the day, I watched this movie and I was like, yeah, I guess that was interesting, and then you kind of move on from there. So guys, that was my non-spoiler and spoiler review of Mufasa the Lion King. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Did you enjoy Mufasa the Lion King? Are you looking forward to it if you haven't seen it? And I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have, let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, this is it. This is, I dare say, one of the most historic days in cinema. Perhaps that's a hyperbole, perhaps that's an over-exaggeration, but guys, we have seen, officially, if you are listening to this segment, I am willing to bet you have seen, just like I have seen, the first teaser trailer for the first movie in this brand new DC universe, the first teaser trailer for Superman. So, what does this mean? What does the trailer show us? And what are my thoughts on the trailer itself, as we'll dive into it a little bit here and talk about, why I think it's a good trailer with some promise, but I still have a couple concerns that, to be fair, I had those concerns coming into the trailer, so it's not like this trailer brought up new concerns for me, but these same concerns are things that I had going into it, and I think that the trailer showed me, yeah, maybe that's still going to be the case, but at the end of the day, I don't think this trailer necessarily diminished my excitement for this movie. I was so excited for the trailer itself, but I don't think that translated directly into me being like, oh, this is going to be the best movie of all time. I want it to be one of the best movies of all time, but I have, really a lot of optimism for this movie. I'm so excited for it, but I also, again, I have some concerns, and we'll talk about them in the trailer. So, the first teaser trailer for Superman came out. I watched it just as it came out on the live stream. It's kind of crazy. They were doing this big event, like the first launch of this big DC universe, even though Creature Commandos is going on right now. But, this is really the start of the DCU proper. And anyways, this is the first property that has basically nothing to do with the DCEU, because I've been saying Creature Commandos is almost like DCEU canon more than DCU canon. It's bridging the gap, but still. Anyways, so the Superman trailer starts out here, right? And we have Superman falling from the sky, and he is battle worn and he is bloodied. And I think that's really, it's shot, first of all, shot really well in these scenes at the beginning. And I think it has a very grand sense of scale, but it also feels very personal to Superman as well, which I think is really great. I really like that. And I think that, look, the costume is the costume, right? I personally might prefer the Henry Cavill version. It's not because I want the dark, brooding Justice League version of Superman, not at all. And in fact, if you have been watching the channel, and I'll be posting some more, of those DCEU Look Back podcasts as the weeks go on into the holidays because of some travels and things like that. And I'll talk a lot about the fact that I think Henry Cavill, was missing that joy, that sense of joy that Superman had. And that's okay. I mean, that is the kind of Superman that Zack Snyder was going for, a much darker one. But, I'm sure that this Superman is going to have a more joyful kind of tone. And I think that, just based on the costume alone. But the costume is what it is. It looks bright, it looks kind of bright. And I think, look, it's fine. It's totally fine, because costumes at the end of the day don't make or break a movie. The costumes, I think, maybe indicate something about the movie, like the kind of tone that James Gunn is trying to set here. But I think that it's just, for me, right, I'd like a little bit more of a justification, especially with Superman, right, where it's like, okay, like, is this the suit that came from the Fortress of Solitude? And if not, then what? Then why? Why does he dress this brightly? And, does the S mean anything? Like all that kind of stuff. Because in the comic books, right, when Superman was first created in the 50s or 60s or something like that, in the action comic books, I mean, nobody cared about that kind of stuff, right? Nobody cared. It's Superman, right? But I think, for me at least, as somebody who's watching this movie, and I think one of the critical differences now is that I'm watching these movies kind of in this perception of, okay, this is taking place in an Earth that's adjacent to ours. Like, it's not exactly like our Earth. Obviously, there are Green Lanterns and Mr. Terrifics and Ultramans and all these kinds of, characters going around here. But it's supposed to represent our Earth in a certain way. And so I think I just like some explanations for certain things and just maybe explaining like why things look the way that they do. Anyways, that's all fine. So then he's lying in the snow and he whistles. And immediately as he whistles, I knew that it was going to be Crypto. And I'll talk about Crypto in just a little bit here, but first let's get back to the other stuff in the trailer. So we see a little bit more of David Cornsweet and Rachel Brosnahan as Clark Kent and Lois Lane. I have to say, this is the best that a movie or a live action medium has convinced me that Clark Kent is not going to be recognized as Superman. Because yeah, sure, I mean, you kind of squint and you're like, you could see the similarities, but I mean, you could do that with any one of your friends, right? I'm sure that your friends have gone, your friends have been like, don't you think this person looks like me? And you kind of look and you go, I don't know, maybe not. And I think that you could do the same thing with this Clark Kent, so it makes it believable, right? Like, he's wearing glasses, his hair is different. He really is portraying that kind of more bumbling, like awkward kind of figure. Henry Cavill was just Superman with glasses. And I think that this Clark Kent dynamic is really working for me. I think one of the big strengths of this trailer is that without any dialogue between the two characters, because the only piece of dialogue you hear in this trailer is the word home, take me home, right, from Superman. But without any dialogue between Clark Kent and Lois Lane, I felt it. I felt that lightning. I felt that dynamism, rather. And I felt that, in all the scenes that they're with, and I loved, by the way, that the trailer didn't end. It's such a small thing. I love, though, that the trailer, and they had a kiss scene, I think, in the trailer, but I love the trailer didn't end with a kiss shot, because it would have been, I feel like that would have been very kind of on the nose, be like, oh, Clark Kent, Lois Lane. I love, actually, that it ended with a hug. I think that that's so poignant, honestly, because it's like these two people, it's beyond just romantic love and all that kind of stuff. It's like true, genuine affection for one another. And I think that that's something that really bled through into this trailer. Just every single scene with Clark Kent and with Lois Lane together, I saw that. I don't know, I'm probably way over analyzing these things, but hey, this is the YouTube channel that you came for, right? Over analyzing blockbuster media, so here we are. Anyways, I'm going through this trailer right now. So we get the scenes here, he whistles, right, from James Gunn, and then here comes Crypto. Okay. Actually, before we get to Crypto, there are some shots here of Clark Kent on the farm with Pa Kent. I think that's really sweet, honestly. I think that you got to ground him in his humanity, and I think that that's awesome. But let's get back to Crypto. Okay, here's the thing. I want to be very careful with what I say, because people often like to misconstrue things. I love dogs. I think the dog that's playing Crypto is adorable. I love dogs. The second that Crypto came on screen, took me out of the trailer immediately. And the thing is, right, because I don't know. It's enough for me to say, okay, there are a bunch of other, and we'll get to Guy Gardner in just a second. Guy Gardner also immediately took me out of the trailer. But anyways, well, all these other superheroes wearing these kinds of fantastical costumes, and even David Cornsweet's costume looking a little bit brighter, and that's fine, whatever. You can get over it. I not having read the comics and not having an attachment to Crypto is what I'm going to preface this by saying. The idea, just the shot of a dog wearing a red cape, it immediately took me out of the movie, because I think there's a suspension of disbelief, and I think everyone has a different level of what they're willing to accept in these superhero movies, right? And for me, just the thought of just the idea that there's a dog here that's wearing a cape like that just immediately took me out of the trailer. Now, I'm not going to say, because I very well am willing to admit that I'm going to come out of Superman saying Crypto was the best part of it, because he probably is going to be the best part of it. I mean, it's a dog. It's so cute, such a cute dog. But just in this trailer alone, right? I think that there's one thing to bring the joy, like bring the happiness and bring the energy, but it's another thing to be like a little bit goofy. And I'm really hoping, because James Gunn, for all of his great, superhero things that he's done, all the Guardians films, Peacemaker, Suicide Squad, he dabbles in the goofy. One of the things I really didn't like about the Guardians of the Galaxy, or more specifically Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and 3 in particular, is that he just kind of goes for the joke sometimes, when I think that he should have just let scenes either settle or maybe had the pacing, go a little quicker. There's one scene in particular in Guardians of the Galaxy 3 that I was like, can we move along, please? It was that scene where they're on the couch in that animal's house, and they're just going back and forth about Drax putting his feet up on the couch. And I was like, God, can we can we move on, please? Because sometimes it works, right? I think the button scene in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, if you remember that, where Peter Quill presses the wrong button, he's talking to Gamora, that's great. That's really funny. I think that works also on an emotional level because Peter's pouring his heart out to Gamora and then other people hear him. The couch thing, I was like, James Gunn, like, I get it. Can we move on, please? And I think I'm just really a little bit concerned here that, I hope Crypto is not like that for Superman. Because, again, I mean, like, what is the rationale behind having this dog here? Because I know Crypto has different origins in the comics, I believe. I looked up a little bit about Crypto. And there are a little bit, there are different stories about why and how he got to Earth and whatnot. And it's all just in good nature and good fun. But in this universe where you're meant to be like, it's Earth, right? I hope that there's a good reason for Crypto to be Crypto. That's all I'm saying. Anyways, we get shots here of Superman protecting somebody, a little child, and I think that that's awesome. I mean, these are the kinds of shots that you want to see in a Superman teaser trailer. For sure, you get shots of Lex Luthor and Luthor Corp. Again, really cool. I think Nicholas Hoult, by the way, great casting for Lex Luthor. I think he's going to be awesome in the role. Superman breaking out of a cage here. I love the shot of the kid kind of holding the Superman flag. Again, don't want to keep comparing this to DCEU and Snyder Cut and whatnot, but reminds me a little bit about those scenes in Batman v Superman where people are drawing the Superman symbol on the roof and trying to reach out to Superman. But I'm hoping again, because I think that I mentioned this before in the Man of Steel look back, and you'll hear me talk about this in the Batman v Superman and Justice League versions, is that just the hope, the joy out of Superman. I'm really hoping that comes back. Not to say that I don't want this to be grounded either, because I think the shots that come next where people are throwing things at him, really, like, I think that there will be dark moments where he's kind of at his lowest point, right? I think that that'll be really interesting as well. Speaking of lowest points, though, look, I am fully admitting here as well, I've said this many, many times, I don't really read comic books, right? So Guy Gardner appears, and I'd seen pictures of Guy Gardner, just based on when Nathan Fillion was cast as Guy Gardner, and I was like, look, I mean, things have a tendency to look goofy in the comics, and sometimes the movies can pull it off, and sometimes they don't. I'm sorry. Guy Gardner, the look of Guy Gardner just immediately pulled me out of the trailer. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I think overall, the trailer is good, right? I think it gives me hope that this is the kind of Superman that will bring jokes, and I really hope it doesn't delve into the James Gunn goofiness, because I think there is real promise here of emotional weight to a lot of these things that are going on here, which I love. I think that would be amazing if that was the case here. But I mean, Crypto and Guy Gardner, and a little bit later that giant beast floating in the air, which again, nothing inherently wrong about that, but I just, it feels a little less grounded or serious. That's not the right word, but I hope you guys understand what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say the trailer looks awful or anything like that. I'm just saying the concerns that I had going into this was, is James Gunn going to override Superman with James Gunn? And I don't think that's the case, but I do see, at least from my perspective, a little bit of James Gunn kind of peeking out here. We also get some shots here of Hawkgirl. I think Hawkgirl looks pretty good. It looks actually quite similar to the design of the Hawkman that we got in Black Adam, which is interesting. And then we get the shots. These are my favorite shots, the entire trailer. My favorite shots, and honestly, my favorite scenes in this entire trailer are the ones with Lois and Clark or Superman. And my favorite ones here are the ones where Superman and Lois are in the dark apartment or office building or whatever, and there's a giant orb that's floating in the background, and you're just focusing in on them. Those shots are amazing. I love them. We also have some shots here of the Fortress of Solitude. We have Metamorpho a little bit, buildings falling, Lex Luthor getting angry, Superman, in distress, and Crypto. We also have, as a big baseball fan, excuse me, I don't know if you guys knew that. I mentioned it once in a while on this channel. It's kind of funny to see a baseball stadium here. It's Progressive Field, the home of the Cleveland Guardians. Anyways, that's kind of funny. Kind of funny that they're fighting on a baseball field. And it looks like it's Ultraman, is what people have been saying he's fighting. But anyways, could be wrong. We see Mr. Terrific. Again, the costumes, a little bit much for me. The eye mask and, everything like that. It just feels like the costumes feel like they were taken out of the early 2000s, late 90s comic book movies, which is fine. Like, if James Gunn wants to go for that aesthetic, that's totally fine. And like I said, if the story's amazing, the costumes will be the costumes, right? But it's just sort of getting a sense of the tone of this Superman film. And like I said, hope, joy, optimism, everything. The shot of Superman flying into the sky, by the way, amazing. But, at the end of the day, I just hope that it's all still kind of grounded in somewhat of a real fashion of the real world. I love the last shot of this trailer where, again, like I said, Lois and Clark are hugging, and I assume right before he goes out into battle. And that's it. That's the Superman trailer. So guys, look, to wrap up my thoughts here, this is much longer of a segment than any normal trailer reaction, but that's intentional because it's an important trailer. I like this trailer, right? I know some people online have been saying this is the best trailer. How dare you for not thinking? That's totally fine. It's all just, our opinions. And at the end of the day, I'm still very excited for this film. I'm still very, very excited for this film. The things that I saw in this trailer that I liked were the things that I was hoping to like. The things that I saw that I didn't like in this trailer were the things that I was a little bit concerned about. I'm still concerned about. And that's really just James Gunn overriding Superman. Because James Gunn is a very distinctive director. He's a very distinctive director. We've seen this now because he's done the same kind of thing in the superhero genre 6 times now. Guardians 1, Guardians 2, Guardians 3, The Suicide Squad, Peacemaker, and now Creature Commandos. He has a formula. He has a way of doing things. But I have some hope here that this is going to be a little bit different. This is going to be Superman. And not that James Gunn wasn't taking the old stuff seriously, but I think that he's going to be handling this with a little bit extra care. So guys, let me know in the comments down below. Was this the best trailer that was ever made? I don't think so, but if you do, that's awesome. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this first Superman trailer. Alrighty, and at long last, thank you so much for joining us. That is the end of the most comically long episode of the Access Blockbusters pod. I was just, throughout the week, like I said, I record clips and I talk about these things, and then I don't really even think about the fact that I have to compile all of them together at the end of the day, and I don't even think about how long it's going to be. Guys, this is a crazy episode, but there was just so much to talk about. Black Panther 3, Nova, Hayley Atwell, Chris Evans, Creature Commando, Skeleton Crew, and of course Superman, obviously. And Mufasa as well. So just so many things to talk about this week. And I'm so glad we ended it on a high note here at the end of the year. Like I said, if you want to check out, if you're still here, I'm assuming if you're still here, you listen to the intro, so you guys know what's up. But if for some reason, you're just hanging out at the outro, not the intro is where I explain what's going to happen next week. And so stay tuned for that. For episode 55 of the Access Blockbusters pod, that will be coming out very soon. Guys, thank you so much for a wonderful 2024. I will have one more episode coming out, like I said, in 2024. That will be pre-recorded, so you won't hear from me, quote unquote, live until 2025, and I'm really excited about that. Guys, have a great holiday season, great Christmas, great New Year's, and all the other holidays if you guys celebrate. And that's it for me. I'll see you guys in the next one.